Yokai Shadows by Brandon Chin. Chapter 1, Yuki. Loud laughter spilled out from the convenience store. A group of university students stumbled out, following their voices. They tripped over each other, hugging it out as they made their way down to the shopping arcade. I could hear them swapping slivers of the night's escapades as I wavered in the opposite direction. My belly was an oasis of white wine. It had been a while since I treated myself, but this was a special occasion. Not only was it the new year, but I had finally finished the no theater mask that had stumped me since the fall. It was a koamote mask that represented innocence and softness. Elements I had to throw away after leaving my father's mask carving business. I didn't want to remember his death once a year, but the family festivities and food always brought the tears back. The constriction in the chest felt the same as when he first left. That gripping fear of whether I was ready to face the world on my own never quite dissipated. A bench next to a line of covered food stalls entered my line of sight. As I sat down, I balanced one hand on the neighboring stall. Immediately, the white canvas tarp came off. I squinted in tipsy and saw that something had fallen off the stall. I covered myself with the tarp like a blanket and reached down to scoop up the object. Wood? I turned it over and my eyes shot open. It was a no-theater mask, but my brain couldn't fully register it. The visual was there, but the meaning didn't follow. I sat there for more than a few minutes, staring at it, turning it over in my hands with the tarp over my knees. I heard whispers and laughter pass me, but I felt no need to look up because this strange, yet sacred mask stared back at me without an explanation of why it was in an old food stall. The mask was heavy with history, the bone lines in the forehead, the slope of the nose on all sides, and how it guided the viewer down to the mouth, the thickness of the cheeks, the porcelain hue of the skin. My father always said some masks were more than just art. They're vessels of stories, holding spirits of the past. What a shame that these harborers of history were slowly decaying as the generations came and went. Their value decreased with each newborn human, almost as if they never had a story worth sharing, almost a millennia's worth of sweat and blood poured into preserving their tales just as they were told at the beginning. Now, the stories could only exist if the few left fashioning the faces out of blocks of wood continued to carry the legacy on their backs. But were there enough of us? Was I enough? I stared into its eyes. A pit not empty, but full. Waves of past lives flowing through its cracks. The small smile seemed to grow, the crow's feet at her eyes clawing their way to my core. I could almost feel an energy cascading forward. So much value wrapped up in one plane of wood. But was I the only one who saw it? The only one to... "Excuse me, ma'am." I threw my head up. A tall black man in a forest green yukata stood leaning over me. His eyes were darting back and forth between my face and the mask. His curiosity leaked through the polite smile. "Yes," I said. "Where did you get that mask?" I held up the mask. It was old and worn, but authentic. At first sight, I could tell that it was a koamote mask, based on the number of hairlines. This was in this," I said, pointing to the stall. Then I looked at him and scrunched my brow. "Why do you ask?" He straightened his posture and smiled. "I am a collector of traditional, Japanese crafts, and I've never seen a no-theater mask as old as this." I tilted my head. "Are you Japanese?" "No, I'm from Ghana. All my clients live in African countries, but I've been here for a decade." "No wonder your Japanese is so good. I'm in awe of this one, too. Do you mind if I take a look?" His eyes were almost sparkling. I hesitated. It was late, and although there were still plenty of people passing through the arcade, I didn't feel entirely comfortable offering the seat next to me, despite how cute he was. Almost as if he saw my thought process playing out above my head, he slowly sat down without a word. He looked surprised as I did. "If you don't mind, of course," he said. I stared at him for a moment and saw the faint lines around his eyes and mouth. He had to be in his upper 30s, no more than a few years older than me. I passed him the mask and tension gripped my shoulders. He looked it over while shaking his head. This has to be a relic. I mean, the signature on the inside has similar kanji to Edo period family crests. And the wood feels old. You said this fell out of that stall? I took a deep breath, adjusting myself on the seat to create some distance. Yep. I looked over. He was staring at the mask like he was trying to sear the paint off. Yeah, if I wasn't so tipsy, I'd see how it differed from my own masks. He flicked his head towards me. You make masks? I sighed. The wine was talking. Yes, I've been doing it for a while. Or maybe I was just lonely. He bladed his body. That's amazing. Any specialties? I pursed my lips. Everything. He grinned and handed the mask back to me. And multi-talented, I'm Kwame, by the way. I took the mask and bowed. What's your name? He said, not taking the hint. I slightly widened my eyes, looking around the arcade without turning my head. He raised his palms. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Have a good night. He stood up and began to walk off. After a few steps, he turned around and gestured at his face. Thanks for showing me your mask. The sharp edge of pride pushed me off the bench. I'm Yuki. He grinned. Nice to meet you. I caught myself staring at his ass as he walked away. His yukata displayed it clearly. Plump but firm, it shifted the green textiles smoothly across each bun. I shook the tipsiness away. It had been a while since I had been out. Mask carving took up most of my time, and all I had in my brain were faces of antiquity and legends of old. I looked down at the mask in my hands, yet somehow the art form never ceased to pull me deeper. I found a taxi and stared out the window on the way back. Temples and shrines smudged between department stores flew by. The lampposts sung a steady glow, guiding those that came alive at night. I saw groups of short skirts followed by groups of fur coats, a couple clad in kimono, college students in sweats, a young family with suitcases. Then the mask appeared in the glass. Where was it from? Did it belong to the owner of the food stall? I shook my head. My intention wasn't theft, but that's exactly what it was if the mask belonged to the food stall owner. Still, my gut told me the mask found me. I turned to the opposite window and saw Kwame's face. I remembered his strong jawline and his broad nose, his thick lips and his eyes. His eyes. They were beacons of light that pierced my rustiness on the dating field. It had been 6 years since my last serious relationship, and Kwame had awakened my desire to be held again. The taxi dropped me off at my studio, and I made my way to the second floor where few customers knew I lived. Most business owners had their shops attached to their houses, but we all tried to make it discreet, for safety, sure, but more out of pride. I undressed, letting my clothes hit the tatami. The Shochan lanterns I had bought from Yame City in Fukuoka rocked as I adjusted their lighting down to the dimmest setting. I folded out my futon. Now I could hop into the shower, but not before looking at myself in the floor mirror. I liked my chest and hips, but recently I found my posture lacking. All that bending over at my studio desk was not kind to my overall appearance. I wonder what Kwame thought when he saw me. Did he really just approach me for the mask? Still, his directness was off-putting. I got into the shower and let the warm water soothe me into a daze. After a while of sitting under the shower head, I soaped up and washed off and got into the bath. The bath filled itself every day according to a timer. My place wasn't fancy at all, but I had a few tiny luxuries that I wouldn't trade for anything. After 20 minutes, I stepped out and toweled off. The bathroom mirror showed my flushed face and droopy eyes, so I hurried through my skincare routine to get into bed before it got too late. Once I got to bed and shut off the lights, all I could see in the dark was the old mask staring back at me. Behind my eyelids, the same image. It wasn't terrifying, just odd. I felt like I wasn't giving it the attention it begged for. After a few minutes of playing a staring contest with this artifact in my own eyelids, I got up and retrieved it from the hinoki wood box I'd stored it in. As soon as I opened the box, the mask leapt from its place and started floating in the air. I fell back on my ass and let out a small scream. It hovered in place before it moved towards me and blinked its eyes. Thank you for uncovering me. My head hit the floor and all went black.
Chapter 2. Kwame. She could get it. I was headed to the Kansai International Airport to greet a client from Ethiopia, and all I could think about was Yuki. The mask she uncovered was burning a hole in my mind for sure. But Yuki's face did something else to me, unlike the pushover women who flung themselves at any and all foreigners. She felt like a challenge. Still, I couldn't get my mind off her, and it seemed like I wasn't the only one. There were leads on the mask coming from corners of the shokunin world that I hadn't seen previously. It was startling how elusive these people were. I found myself already wanting to protect her, despite the looming pain of attaching myself to her too early. I stood up with my small handbag made from kurume gasuri. The indigo-dyed textile was durable, but also made heads turn. I liked the idea that Japanese people couldn't understand that a foreigner also liked their art. They either didn't understand how valuable it was from some type of complex, or they didn't see me as worthy of it. After more than a decade here, I've come to see it's usually the former. Through years of getting pummeled with images of European faces, they forgot themselves. They began to emulate that standard of beauty, always opting for the Western brand over their traditional craftsmanship, which served their ancestors quite well. I was here to explore that history and export it to my own culture, where I could hopefully reinvigorate my own society, a place that had become warped and unrecognizable. From every angle, attitudes and agendas were pulling my people away from themselves and onto someone else's teeth. Ye hope to stand in the shoes of the man I was named after, Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, by fighting for independence and skilled organization. Japan was an expert at training its people to align for the good of the group. Kwame, so good to see you, my brother. Happy New Year. Janet, the Ethiopian official who had his president's ear, was on a diplomatic mission in China before their busy New Year in February and decided to drop by to catch up with me. It had been 7 years since we last met, but his English still had that Amharic twang to it. I returned his embrace. Where are your threads? He was wearing the standard diplomat suit without any representation from his country. He smiled and shrugged. You know how it is. Can't get too loud when I'm on the country's dime. What do you have planned for me this time? I grinned and slapped him on the back. Straight to it as usual. This time I've got some faces you'd like to see.
Chapter 3. Yuki. I woke up to a heavy head, too much wine, but no, the mask. I quickly sat up and flicked my eyes around the room. The box was there ajar, but the mask lay on the floor like any other non-sentient object. Wine-induced hallucinations? I shuddered. That voice, it was unlike anything I'd heard. A mix of the feminine and masculine, yet ethereal. It had an otherworldly resonance that shook me at my foundation. Could it be connected to the yokai legends that my parents rocked me to sleep with? All those beasts of different colors and forms would stare at me from the pages silently, but I'd always narrate them with voices in my head. I had awoken something, not just in the mask, but within myself. There was a heat that started to bubble underneath my skin, one I hadn't experienced since my days studying directly under my father, when No's future shone bright outwardly and inwardly. But I had no ears to lay these forgotten tales on, no one to share with. Kwame popped up in my mind's eye. I closed the box and shook my head. Whatever it was, the only thing I could do was to research its origin. But where to start? I flipped through all the book carvers and actors from the No Theater world in my mind, but none of them seemed appropriate for this type of situation. I could already see their brows furrow as I told them I took it from a random stall in the shopping arcade. Someone connected but outside the no world seemed like the best option, but I didn't even give Kwame my number. I shook my head, closed the box, and brought it down to the studio. My masks all stared at me from their mantles on the walls. Men, women, and demons. From stories across the centuries, Chinese folk tales, and Japanese stories that scared the likes of children, yet stirred something inside of adults. A fine balance that my father ensured I mastered before he died. The relic mask had something that superseded that balance, an energy that ruptured it. The fear it inspired in children also applied to adults, but in the same way my curiosity overpowered my fear. If even a foreign collector could see the value in such a mask at a distance, why was it tucked away in some stall? I opened the box and removed the mask. I could feel the hairs rise on my skin looking at it. The mouth didn't move last night, but it had spoken. The voice was airy, like how I imagined the yokai to sound as a child, although I couldn't quite pin down which yokai's appearance the voice would match. Anyway, it'll present itself again. I prepared the studio for work and opened the shop. The rest of Osaka was essentially closed down due to the holidays. All gathered to eat osechi and attend 3 shrines in their local area to pray for abundance throughout the year. I, instead, chose to create my own abundance. Whether that was out of necessity or escape was still lost on me. The motivation didn't matter as much as the movement. After pouring myself some green tea into my favorite bison pottery cup, I got to work. Soon I saw that a few hours had passed. I put down my chisel, stood up off my zabuton, and stretched. I continued like this for the next few days without a peep from the mask. Just before the weekend came and the city started to wake back up, I heard the doorbell ring. I turned from my zabuton and saw Kwame in the doorway with that grin and another man of similar stature.
Chapter 4. Kwame. Yuki slowly opened the door for us. Hi Kwame, how did you find me? Sorry to pop up on you like this. I visited the Osaka No Theatre Association and they had your shop listed in their directory with your name. My curiosity for the mask just moved my body automatically. We can come another day if... No, that's fine. It's just been a while since I met someone so proactive. She turned her head to Jeanette with that look that most Japanese people had when first seeing a foreigner they'd never met before. The tension in the eyebrows and slight fear in the eyes that said, I might not be able to communicate with this alien. I gestured to Janet. Thank you. I thought I'd bring my friend to check out your elite-level masks. He's visiting from Ethiopia for the umpteenth time. I'm Janet. You heard a lot about your no masks. I've never seen no theater, but I'm highly interested in collecting some to bring back to my country. Her eyebrows eased into surprise. Well, thank you. I didn't think our brief encounter would lead to an international collector, but here we are. She motioned for us to enter the shop. I smiled at her English, so natural, the syllables and the snark. The masks lined the walls with their brows tied up in different shapes of waves. Their colors designated their life energy. Women, demons, gods, and men all stared down at me, piercing my core. The shapes of the eyes relevant to the nose and the mouth. It all went together so well. The expressions frozen in time, but always molding to the moment. Their double meanings outstretching their emotional threads for the viewer to latch onto and join their world without resistance. The fierceness of the eyes always contradicting the folds in the forehead to balance out what they were trying to say. And they were always trying to say something. It was just up to us to understand and interpret according to our own life experiences. Ever since I landed in Japan, I hadn't encountered another art form that had hit me so deeply. So many varieties, Janet said, his eyes drinking in all the faces. You must feel proud to have brought these beautiful pieces to life. Yuki crossed her arms. Yes, I poured myself into them. And I'm sure they poured back into you, Janet said, inching closer to the wall to appreciate the detail. I saw Yuki's eye twitch as she stared into the distance. What have you been working on recently? She shook her head. Right, sorry. I've been buried away in this studio for the past few days. Let me show you. After a decade here, I still couldn't get used to the front-facing palm wave with the fingers pointing down instead of up. It just looked like petting some invisible spirit. Still, I followed her lead. This is the red Hanya, Yuki said, handing me the mask with two hands, delicately grasping the ears. My breath slowed, and I took the mask into my hands. I took in the colors. I took in the shape and let the features wash over me. The arch of the brow. Her jealousy for the woman her man chose over her culminated in anger, but shielded by some type of sentimentality. A longing for the past. Pure pain. A hurt that was only to be known for those she held dearest to her. That was the difference between the Hanya and the other masks. She held part of her heart behind the rage. Others were more forthcoming, but only for a moment. I saw something more than the sinister energy and the background pain the Hanya was known to emulate. A stark difference between it and the normal light brown Hanya, and it wasn't just the red paint.
Chapter 5. Yuki. Jeanette had decided to collect the red Hanya later and left for another appointment after agreeing to meet with Kwame for dinner later that night. Yuki, can I talk to you about something? I looked up from my cup of green tea. Kwame's smile faded after we wished each other Happy New Year and talked about the Nengacho postcards he received from his shokunin clients. While Jeanette was gentle, I somehow appreciated Kwame's straightforwardness, although it slightly irked me. The way he sat next to me the night we met without waiting for approval was both a breath of fresh air and a thorn in my side. I put my cup down and rubbed my brow. What is it? I think you have a tail, or rather multiple tails. Someone stalking me? Possibly, but not for the typical reason. They're after the mask you found, and they are serious about prying it from your hands at whatever cost. He took a sip from his tea, the tension in his brow staying firm. I followed and raised my cup, slightly swirling the tea inside. He seemed protective, but somehow distant. Okay, let's say there really is an organization looking for my Koamote mask. If they wanted it and had the power to take it, why haven't they come yet? It had been close to a week since I found it, yet no whispers of some sneaky group hunting down this ancient mask had passed my ears from the locals. He shook his head. Sure, rumors are wisps of smoke, but there are people I trust in the traditional craft world, shokunin like you, who are frozen in fear. These people have spent their lives mastering their craft, but when I went around asking about the mask, all of their faces changed. His thick lips were pursed, his eyebrows bent and pulled inwards, his forehead creased, for the first time, his sighs reassuring. This mask, it's not just a relic, Yuki. It's a key to something, massive, powerful enough to shake the spirits of world-class shokunin. And all within a week, Kwame said, his voice low. So it unlocks something, a spirit? I asked, shaking a chill that pierced my body. And I crossed my arms tightly. His eyes widened. One more time, I gripped my arms harder to stop my voice from quickening. I've always believed in the mystic nature of these masks, the connection to past lives and stories. But this, any ideas? Well, Ghana is no stranger to spirits. Only thing we can do now is dig further. Find the source and see what we can uncover from there. First, we should secure the mask. Are you comfortable with it here? Suddenly, the air got colder in the studio. I took another sip of my tea, cradling the bison cup in my hands, desperate to extract any bit of warmth. I could. The light brown Hanya mask on the wall peered down at me with sadness instead of the rage it's known for. I know it'll be safe here. The youthful face of the Koamote floating flashed in my mind. He relaxed his brow. Good, let's keep it here then. You said you found it in a stall when we met the other day. Whoever hid it there most likely knew about the group. This time, let's make sure no random drunk finds it. I tilted my head and scrunched my brow. Now who said I was drunk? He smirked. Come on now. I saw your eyes. You looked like this. He lowered his eyelids and swung his head erratically. I make masks, you know. I stared at him expressionless. He slowly returned his head to its neutral position. I've always worked alone. I thought I was the only one that got it. My father isolated himself, and now I find myself on the same path, I said. The memory of countless lonely days carving locked deep in my studio away from human contact banged at my head from all sides, threatening to cave it inwards, fighting the face of loneliness by embedding faces with life. Sometimes legacy needs more than one pair of shoulders. Let me help, Kwame said, smiling. I looked him up and down. His slim, bulky figure sat relaxed on my zabuton. His eyes told me he was genuine. Still, I felt the tightness of anxiety in my chest. Or was it a dull anger?
Chapter 6. Kwame. She needs help, I told Jeanette. He had traveled all over Osaka to soak in the lingering New Year spirit in the city that never slept. With the most Michelin stars in the world, Tokyo had the reputation of Japan's 24-hour city. But Osaka came in a close second. The city had fewer people overall, but it felt fuller because of the direct communication and natural humor. Help with what? Janet said, smirking and nudging me with his elbow. Nah, come on, man. You know I'm booked full in that arena. Dates every week. But with worthy partners, you told me yourself last time I came that a lot of your dealings were shallow. I rubbed the back of my neck. You're right. It's been tough trying to find the right one for the long run. They got to be more than just thick. I think you're in the wrong country for that, Jeanette said, laughing from his belly. You'd be surprised, man. Plenty of wide-hipped women out here walking with a mean sway, I said. Yuki was the first one in a while that I naturally felt drawn to protect. More than the Ko-Omote mask, I wanted to ensure that she wasn't damaged in any way, emotionally or physically. Yet I still found myself hesitant to fully commit. I had seen too many faces flush themselves of compassion despite years of dedication on my part. My chest started to tighten. What you feeling for lunch right now? I said, exhaling slowly. Noodles. I had some ramen the other day, and it beats anything you could find in New York. Tonkatsu. You mean tonkotsu? That's the one with heavy pork broth from Fukuoka. Tonkatsu is the pork cutlet on a bowl of rice. But I know a great noodle spot, something with a lighter broth to it so that you aren't coating your throat with lard. Let's go. By the way, any shows we can check out while I'm here? The masks are one thing, but I want to see them in action on stage. I scratched my chin as we stepped onto the subway at Umeda. There was a large group of Chinese tourists, all wearing bright puffer jackets as they talked loudly without restraint. Japanese trains were notorious for enforcing an unconscious rule of silence on the train. But Osaka hated rules, which allowed tourists to fit right in. Shows everywhere, all the time. Depends on what you're looking for. You got Kyogen. No, Kyogen. Saw that last time I was here. Way, way back. But the bad taste still plagues my palate. It has to be something with the Ko-Omote. I laughed. Kyogen was meant for the older Japanese crowd that could understand the archaic jokes. The lack of masks also made it a performance hard to concentrate on for a few hours. You're a fan of the Ko-Omote, yet you bought the red Hanya? A smirk came to his face. You collect what hits you the hardest. But the Koomote has more grace. And what's that thing they say about it? It's the pinnacle for every mask carver. If you master the young virgin's face, you can do all the faces, I said. That must be what the organization was after, comprehensive mastery of the art form consolidated into one face. He opened his palms and shrugged his shoulders. Who wouldn't want to see the pinnacle of an art form in the spotlight? I get you, but like I was saying, she needs help, man. He let his arms fall to his side and cocked his head with lowered eyelids. I stopped walking too. What? I never knew you to be the type to hold yourself back. The man that uprooted himself to find a new home in the island nation notorious for shunning foreigners. She's different. When we first talked, she didn't have the typical resistance. It wasn't, oh my God, a foreign alien. It was more resistance to working together. Maybe she's also had her trust ruptured repeatedly by the people she's loved the most. His eyebrows raised. Well then, yes, she does need help. And you know what I need? Food. I smiled and put my arm over his shoulder. I got you, my guy.
Chapter 7. Yuki. The Koomote had entered the halls of my imagination and took over. I could see its rough exterior peel away as it turbocharged through the creases of my brain. Organic mass sprang out from the back of the mask. Spindles of tissue and muscle rippled through the air and formed a body. The mask embedded itself into the blank head and looked down at its hands, admiring its new frame. It then looked up at me with that fixed expression of rage, but instead, with a closed mouth. The mask went green, and the body became burly and covered in moss. Almost like a manifestation of the Kappa Yokai from the dark swamps of lore, its sharp teeth spilled over its lips and it launched itself at me. I jerked upright on my futon in a cold sweat. My chest heaved up and down. I tried to slow my breathing with deep inhales and exhales, but nothing would erase the grip of the no kappa as it devoured my neck. I stood up and stumbled to the bathroom to wash my face. I scrubbed as if I could wash the fear away. After a while, the kappa melted from my mind. I dried my face and went back to bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, utterly confused. Why was I the only one to bear this burden? If this organization had no limits on what they were willing to do to retrieve the mask, then wasn't its value provably inherent? Kwame went in depth on how he felt about preserving traditional crafts as a whole, and he was right. The responsibility of keeping No alive shouldn't be attributed to the few mask makers and actors on stage. The historical and cultural relevance to the country warranted more investment and involvement from the state. It had to be an interdependent and collaborative event. Otherwise, what was the point? Before I drifted off completely, I decided to approach city officials in the morning. If I let it, this stress would tear me open before the group did. And I wouldn't let the profession kill me like it did my father.
Chapter 8. Kwame. I got tickets last minute for a no performance featuring the Koomote. It was an anniversary special at the Congo Theatre in Kyoto, but I knew the director. Some local politicians who couldn't make it opened up box seats for us. I'll never regret the time and energy I put into making connections during my first few years in Japan. The relationships paid dividends throughout the years. We reached the theater a good 30 minutes beforehand and found our seats. The unreserved seating down below was a sea of white hair and small waves of laughter. Short clicks from the camera crew filled the pockets of silence as fellow no-freaks trickled into the space. I glanced at Jeanette and saw him taking it all in. None of the attendees gave any semblance of belonging to some secret organization. I relaxed my shoulders for a bit. 7 years is crazy, though, I said, leaning in. He held his fist to his mouth, smothering a laugh. "You're right. Next time, you got to come through. How are we supposed to link when you stay locked up in that office? Listen, I knew what I was signing up for. I bring cultural ideas from all over the world back to Ethiopia. Sure, they say we are the birthplace of the first Homo sapiens, but we still have much to learn. This is how I give to future generations. We stared at each other blankly for a bit, then cracked. These hours are insane. They got me working the triple shift. Yeah, he said. Just then, the lights lowered and the crowd's volume immediately dissipated. I let the last bit of laughter out in a breath. This flash of joy was the feeling I missed the most from back home. The ability to let oneself enjoy a full-bodied laugh. Had my hesitance to deeply connect with others severed the last connections I had with who I was before. The Yokai came out in their black robes one by one and sat down to the right of the stage. Their patience always blew me away. As a choir, it's expected for them to keep the volume and pitch the same as the others. But the fact that they did it while sitting in Seiza with mostly closed eyes, as if they were competing for ultimate meditator, was mind-blowing. While they were sitting for hours, my knees gave out after 10 minutes. Next, the musicians came out. They set up their chairs, adjusted their positions, and began to tap the drums. The resonance of the taiko colored the sharp bellows of the musicians, while the flute hit the audience with enough spice to cut the connection between reality and this new world they were inviting us into. The rhythms climbed, and the choir joined in to fully transport us there. I went willingly, and by the looks of it, Jeanette did too. Soon, a maskless shite came out to start the story. These shite acted out the historical figures playing in the realms of earth and heaven, among the likes of gods and demons. Their movement was graceful as always, sliding across the wooden floor with slightly bent knees, never changing their height. I rubbed my knees reflexively. After 10 years, I adapted to everything in this country but the self-induced physical pain. The philosophy of conquering the spirit by molding the body through pain was the common thread in all of the traditional arts in Japan. From simple overwork to the actual physical bending of the spine that weavers suffered from sitting and working a loom all day, pain was the root. But I was good. My home had already taught me enough about pain. After an hour or so, we were coming up to the intermission when the ko-omote made its debut. The shite wearing the mask slid across the floor like he was floating. Despite all the actors being men, they played their female roles elegantly enough for you to forget. The shite started switching up his movement, speeding up and slowing down while minding the 4 pillars around the stage. The coordination for their age was impressive. A stomp, a bellow, sliding without any ascension, not hitting the other actors on stage, all while wearing a kimono worth millions of yen. He was facing the audience again. He slid slowly toward the edge of the stage. The chorus was elevating his diligence with a rising drone that bled out any link to the real world I had left. The shite's eyes were barely visible through the small slits of the mask. Yet their movement had the opposite effect of taking me out of the performance. The slight flicker enlivened his presence as the young virgin. Her fire came through him, and for a moment into me.
Chapter 9, Yuki. I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly, the City Hall staff said. You want to request a grant from the city to fund mask makers and actors in no theater? Yes. So that the 600-year-old art doesn't disappear completely? Yes. She stared at me with low eyelids and a dimmed light in her eyes. Well, you'll need to fill out this form and await acceptance. I scratched the top of my head. How long do you think that would take? The staff member blinked her puffy eyes. It depends, but most grant applications take 6 months until acceptance. If they get accepted, of course. I let out a sigh, not to put pressure on the woman who was just doing her job, but to release the stress building in my shoulders. The kappa flashed across my mind again. Are there any other avenues to expedite the process, or maybe something completely random that could help raise funds? I said, my voice louder than normal. Her eyes flickered for a moment, and she leaned in. You could try speaking to the director of grants. You can find him on the 5th floor. He looks unapproachable, but he goes soft when you talk about boosting the city's image. His name is Arita. I bowed deeply. Thank you. I made my way to the 5th floor, past the aunties in long skirts, attending to the small mix of foreign students and grandpas sitting in the lobby waiting for their number to be called. A palette of opportunity seekers and those hurting for comfort on their way out. So many stories behind the eyes waiting to burst forth, but held back for lack of a receiver. The elevator took too long, so I headed towards the stairs. As soon as I put my hand on the guide pole and felt the wooden grain under my palm, my father came to mind. In every grain of wood lies a story waiting to be told. My father had the right idea about no masks, but he didn't anticipate its decline. He was too busy holding it up on his back to see its decay. But maybe I could breathe new life into them. If nothing came of the organization Kwame had mentioned, of course. Were they going to be the block to the stories inside these masks surviving through the years? I turned the corner for the next flight of stairs, and Kwame and his grin rolled through my mind. I shook his image loose. I was frustrated at myself for having him pop up in my mind so often. After passing a few people in suits with slumped shoulders engrossed in conversations they had to have, I arrived on the 5th floor. The floor was quiet, with everyone focused, sitting at their desks staring at computers or a pile of papers. Or maybe they were simply trying to look like they were working. No one noticed me until I said, "Excuse me, is Arita-san in?" The closest woman turned to me and jumped out of her seat, almost grateful. "Hi, yes he is. May I ask what your appointment is about?" I bit my lip. Someone recommended that I talk to him about fresh branding for the city. She smiled and told me to wait for a moment.
Chapter 10, Kwame. Jeanette flew back the day after the performance, and I found my attention drifting towards the group that was hunting the Komote mask. Jeanette made me miss those small blips in reality that gave me a taste of home without fully forcing me back into its fangs. But there was a different set of claws around my neck now. I went to where the words flowed as easily as the liquor. There was a reggae bar that had had the street legends of the city enthralled with it for 3 decades. The owner was almost always there. Unlike most Japanese people who admired black culture, he had natural grey dreadlocks, and they almost touched his heels like Damian Marley. Over the years, I could tell the difference between the ones with extensions and the true admirers of our culture by their smiles. He had the genuine joy of someone from Ghana mixed with the laid-back vibes of a true Rastafarian. I ordered a rum on the rocks and grabbed the seat that wrapped around the bar facing the entrance. It also faced the DJ, an older Japanese woman with a Rasta cap on and a loose black dress. She was playing Barrington Levy's Black Roses on vinyl. The other patrons held their glasses up, filtering the low light into shards of gratitude for the night, letting out shouts of praise at the classic rhythm. The owner walked over and handed the DJ a drink, squeezing her shoulder afterward. After absorbing a few more songs and conversations that had nothing to do with the group or the mask, an older couple came in and sat next to me. They had the aura of party folk that never wasted an evening inside. They ordered tequila shots and immediately went in on the bronze liquid, throwing their salt and pepper hair back. The woman reached over the man and waved at me. "Where are you from?" I smirked. Her English was rough, like most of the older generation whose knowledge of the international world stopped at what they saw in movies and on the news. I'm from Ghana. The woman nodded, smiling. Great country. Chocolate. I took a sip of my drink. It had been over a decade of some great relationships here, but at the expense of suffering through the same conversation with strangers every so often. Thanks. The man, sensing my exhaustion, said in Japanese, "What are you drinking?" That's a first. It's Maya's rum. Great drink, he said, sucking on the lime. Maybe not. After he put the lime down, he looked at me with a faraway look. The last time I had that, I was on a beach in Montego Bay. I was staying at an all-inclusive hotel because of, he nudged his head to his partner, who was now standing and dancing the Rastafarian jump in place, 1 foot up at a time jig. But I thought that was bullshit. I wanted more. The real shit. So we got drunk one night and I found myself alone after she passed out in the room. So I grabbed a taxi and went to a club out in Kingston. It was in the basement of the famous Chin record shop that had legends like Lee Perry come and play sets before dancehall was as international as it is now. Anyway, I had more cups of Maya's rum than I could count at the time. In true Jamaican fashion, I left the party at 10 a.m. to join them for breakfast. I quickly found out that the group I was with was the leading gang faction in Kingston. They were peaceful at the party, but after all the wine and grind, when the liquor and weed were still flowing through their system and their eyelids were low from peak sleep deprivation, let's just say they weren't welcoming to the warring faction that came through the same breakfast joint that day. 1 second I was eating ackee, saltfish, and rundown, and faster than a DJ pulled up a hot record for the crowd, bullets were flying. I got back to the hotel in one piece, but my heart and spirit were hardened ever since I came back to Japan. I sat there in silence for a moment, taking in his face. He was being genuine and open with a stranger in his language as if he was chatting with a native speaker. There was some dialect in there, but it didn't sound like it was from Kansai. All I knew was that this was one of the most refreshing Japanese men I had met in years. Sounds like Jamaica broke you out of that Audiobook. It's so easy to fall into here. The lack of crime in Japan makes it easy to fall into a slumber state of comfort where your awareness completely dulls. I hear similar things from people who visit Ghana. They come back with eyes open and 10 toes on the ground. No wonder they say Ghanaians and Jamaicans are linked, I said, lifting my glass for a kanpai. The old-timer smiled and clinked his empty tequila shot glass with me. He turned to the owner and ordered a rum on the rocks. Within a minute, the owner had the glass down on the man's coaster while his back was turned to the bar, watching and vibing with his partner who had now gathered the other patrons on the dance floor with her high agency personality. He turned it around, grabbed the cup, and held it up to me with a smirk. Yes, sipped on my rum for the next few songs in the set and saw the man join his wife and the other patrons doing their best to wind their hips to the tunes. There was an influx of other night veterans that all had their own style and aura without any of the typical fashion that told you age or occupation. One of the women had a purse made of some type of textile that caught my eye. It was slung over her shoulder, and although I couldn't catch the design, I could tell it was a traditional craft. The texture told me it was wooden. She was taller than a typical Japanese woman. Her smile and the small creases in her cheeks told me she was around my age, mid-30s. She moved to the old-timer to give him the "it's been a while but we're not that close" hug. I finished my rum and waved the owner over to order another. Once it came out, I took it and walked over to the group on the dance floor. The old-timer's partner did a spin and was the first to see me. "Ghana, let's dance." She ran towards me when the old-timer slid in between us and smoothly twirled her into a close embrace. He winked, saving me from a lackluster whine. I passed by him and gave him a pat on the back that the tall woman saw. She met my eyes, and a slight tilt of her head had her long hair falling softly against the curve of her neck. "Excuse me, I saw your bag and it looks like some of the traditional crafts I work with. Where was it made?" Up close, I could see that she was naturally pretty, but her eyes told a story that I instinctively knew I didn't want to be a part of. She smiled in relief that I wasn't hitting on her, looking down at the bag. "That's a good question. I got this from a friend, so not sure." She met my eyes again. "But now that I think about it, my friend is from Hokkaido, so it could be an Ainu textile." "Wow, that's probably the one place I haven't been yet for my work. I've heard about that textile though. I think it's called Nibutani Atus. I love the tree bark it's crafted from. The colors and texture really blend together to transport you to a time when Ainu lived in nature." Her eyes locked onto me. She put her hand on my shoulder and leaned in. Her grip was strong for her frame. The lights went dark. The music cut out. We were alone, and all I heard in the silence was her now raspy voice. "As we have heard about you, we are the shadows. Retract your light, or we shall do it for you." Avstat.
Chapter 11, Yuki. The next day, I met up with Kwame for some tea at a local cafe in a renovated Kominka house that was over 120 years old. The old grain of the structure could rock a screaming infant into a deep sleep. Plants lined the walls next to the wall-length mirrors. Light streamed in, highlighting the open space of one usually found in modern homes. I showed up 15 minutes early, but he was already inside waiting at a table for two. The place was packed, but the conversations were low in volume. The plants and old pottery decorating the shelves created a more unfamiliar environment than what Starbucks or Tully could provide. "You're an early bird, huh?" He flashed me a grin. "You should have seen me when I first arrived in Japan. I used to make people wait a full 30 minutes to an hour because of poor planning." I cringed. "That's horrible." "Yes, indeed. Thus why I show up an extra 5 minutes earlier than the standard 10 minutes before," he said, chuckling, flexing through his Nishijin textile shirt. The silk threads threatened to burst from the force of his triceps at any moment and pushed blood to my extremities. "Anyway, thanks for making time. I wanted to run an idea by you." "Of course, I got stuff to share too. First, what do you want?" He waved the barista over. I grabbed his arm. "Let me get this off my chest first." He paused for a moment and leaned in. "Okay, what's good?" I took a slow inhale. "Thank you. First, I went to the city hall to talk to the grants director, Arita-san. I thought I could get some financial support from the city to preserve a hallowed craft since he knew my father." But, his face contorted, but he couldn't see the point of plowing tax money into a dying art. Somehow, through all the stories of great actors and mask makers like my father, who pushed the art forward in new ways, he couldn't see a seed of potential. I folded my arms. Kwame nodded slowly as if to conjure up my next sentence. "And it turns out that, according to Arita-san, my father had ties to the carver who made our Koamote mask," I said, biting my lip. I still had trouble wrapping my mind around how the mask had found me through my father. His eyes widened. "So we just got to find him." I grinned. "Easier said than done." "He doesn't live in Kansai anymore. And conveniently, no one has heard from him since he moved." He leaned back in his chair. "We like to say, if you are on the road to nowhere, find another road in Ghana. Beautiful way to save time and heartache." I closed my right fist and slammed it on top of my open left palm. "That's exactly it. He has a huge development plan for an expo center where international events can be held. G7 and trade conferences that will line not only Osaka City's pockets but the rest of Kansai as well. Okay, I see where you're going with this. You know, I've lived in Kansai for a while. And to be honest, most of the people come here for the entertainment. The lights and the energy, he said, waving his arms around. Sure, Kyoto is the home of tradition, but with over-tourism, the already pretentious Kyoto citizens are kind of fed up with any more attention and spectacle. As much as I love traditional crafts, I see why the politicians move like they do. I straightened my shirt. No, you're right, and I appreciate the pushback. Each city has to focus on what will keep it from going full ghost town. It just hurts. I've always seen these masks as protectors of tradition. Now, they're entangled in a world that's outpacing it every second. It's daunting, yet somehow I feel energized. Kwame smiled from his eyes, slightly hiding his teeth. Because you're a challenger, as am I. Now let's figure out how we're going to keep No alive. But only after some sweet elixir and the stuff I got to get off my chest. I returned his sly grin. I'll take a matcha latte, low on the sugar.
Chapter 12, Kwame. I took my yuzu ginger tea into my hands and let the aroma wash over me. The slight sour taste of the fruit was enhanced by the root in a way that coffee couldn't hit me. Janet hated when I dissed his beans, but we like what we like. The shadows, Yuki said, her eyebrows creased. And right after I woke up in my bed, shoes on and shoulders still feeling gripped, I shook my head. It had been years since I felt violated. My palms went clammy, yet my torso felt spiky all over as the rage surged upward. If it's the group, how would they know where you were? You were in a small bar on a random night. Nothing to do with crafts, right? I played with the wet tissue wrapper almost as if to wipe the clamminess away. It could be some type of marking. Yuki tilted her head. Some type of charm or spell that can pinpoint the location of the marked. So magic? Yuki said, her eyes squinted. It sounds wild, but no theater somehow marked us, no? The pull we feel for the art is an energetic one. What if they could harness this energy against us? She pulled her bottom lip up and took a sip of her matcha latte. She sucked in air sharply through her teeth as if she was trying to suppress some memory. She took a hurried sip. No, it's magical indeed, but marking, I don't know. I nodded. She could be right. The shadow woman could have just been a vision that only I saw. Or just me tripping out after having a laced drink. Okay, let's go more practical. What if they are simply stalking us? Have you felt like you've been followed recently? Not really. I mean, I haven't really paid attention. But if you want to be practical, we have to acknowledge that you stand out more than I do. I smiled. This is true. And what would they get out of stalking us? They must know that we are clueless on the Koamote mask by now. Right. And if they were stalking us, wouldn't they know that Yuki was storing it at her place? Why wouldn't they just go and retrieve it now? One of the children of the two young mothers across the cafe started crying. The mother didn't look up from her phone once. It could be that they want us to follow up on the mask, I said. By applying pressure? We sat in silence for a moment, letting the chatter of the cafe wash over us as we drank our tea.
Chapter 13. Yuki. We had long finished our drinks, but neither one of us ordered again. After a long silence, Kwame said, "My mother used to always tell me this to calm down in stressful situations. Let not what you cannot do tear you from what you can do." I exhaled slowly. Okay, so what is it that we can do? We know that there's some group looking for our mask, and that they're probably following us. I looked at Kwame, wondering how he'd take my weird encounter with the mask. I'm still trying to process the fact that my dad is connected to this mask. He shook his head slowly. Things like this are usually connected. Everything is connected, really. And look at us. We spend our whole lives trying to discover how. Usually, hearing vapid things like that from men would give me the ick. But I agree, instead of focusing on how they're connected, I should just accept it and channel my energy into uncovering more about the mask itself. Kwame chuckled. I like that. What? You think aloud. I smiled. It was a habit I had kept since childhood. Only real friends could stick around to handle my brute honesty. It's been a while since I've been called out for that. If it weren't for this mask, I'd be living cooped up in my studio. I know that's right. I'm just as introverted as you, Kwame said. I scanned his face for a moment in silence. His face was peaceful. I inhaled sharply twice, held it, and exhaled slowly. Would I be left alone on this mission too? Okay, just hear me out before you react. The night I took the mask home, it started floating. It popped out of the box and spoke. The mouth moved and everything. I was so spooked that I passed out. And you know how these things are in Japan. People seeing yokai, all the things. You won't really be taken seriously by anybody except the grandmas who have nothing but time on their hands. Kwame just stared at me for a moment with his eyes widened. Yeah, I get it. I spend all my time alone. It would make sense for me to make these visions up. Some type of work-induced trauma prob. What language did it speak? Kwame said. I scrunched my mouth up. What was that? Japanese, English, Japanese. Okay, so we know that whatever spirit is inhabiting it is from Japan, Kwame said, his voice solid. I guess, wait, what? The mask was floating, Kwame. It can't be real. That it doesn't even happen on stage. But you said you saw it, so let's accept that as reality. I sat back in my chair. Well, yeah, but... Okay, let's say it was real, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. He took it in so calmly, without hesitation, I could feel the tension melt from my chest. So there's a spirit in this mask. What can we do about something like that? Sorry, but I'm not keen on the intricacies of the paranormal. He sat forward. Listen, just because I'm from the motherland doesn't mean I'm into voodoo, although I have aunties that practice it. You acknowledge No is a spiritual art form, no? Well, the Shadow Woman, but yes, of course. And that the No actors on stage infuse some type of energy into the masks they wear with their dedication and essence? 100%, I said, nodding with my palms open. Then who are we to say that a mask from ancient times wasn't eventually worn by some non-human thing? Well, because we know that there are no such non-human things. Otherwise, there would be records. Oh, but we do have records, he said, moving his teacup to the side and leaning in. All those washi paper scrolls and books full of yokai illustrations. Are we going to sit here and pretend that those are all just simple pieces of an artist's imagination? Shigeru Mizuki was one hell of an artist. I wouldn't downplay his work. Oh no, quite the opposite, my friend. His work reignited the old masters' records of their environment. Now you and I can understand what life was like living among these creatures in ancient times. I scanned his face for a moment. You really do believe this? More than belief, I'd say. My family used to tell me stories passed down from griot generations before them. These griots were often referred to as walking libraries. They'd travel all over the African continent, collecting stories and retelling them to the rhythm of whatever instrument they were apt at. And these stories were of the mythological flavor? Very much so. I grew up seeking out the paranormal in everyday things. All different types of things where the flavors were balanced out. Some kind of sweet like your matcha latte, and others sour like my yuzu tea right here. I rolled my eyes. Hey, that was a good one. Osaka folks have a high standard for comedy, but it's okay, you'll get there, I said, winking. He laughed in a booming voice that raised the hairs on my arms. He seemed like he was getting more comfortable around me. I looked around and saw startled faces turn into judgment when they saw the source of laughter. I couldn't help laughing with him.
Chapter 14. Kwame. The only way to dissipate the tension was to face it head-on. The reggae bar had churned out an unexpected lead, but not one I could effectively follow up on. So I continued moving around town, letting the flow of the city carry me forward. The city was like the Hania, formerly a pure woman who turned to a demon at night, when spite and all the darker emotions were too abundant to manage. I already met the demon. Now it was time to search for its original form, the one that could lead me to the root. There were infinite options as a starting point, but I chose to keep it simple. Away from the tourists around Umeda and Osaka and into the hood, Nishinari. The last time I was there, my friend took me on a spontaneous tour. I saw the grungier side of Japan from the back of his bike. A line of homes with doors ajar where a dolled-up woman sat inside the entrance, displaying her beauty to onlookers. Their protectors, older women, sat outside to conduct the transaction for a customer's hour in heaven. He reassured me with, "Maybe she's just having a simple conversation with them upstairs." I saw what this type of work did to people in Ghana. Multiple partners a day for years on end. One's eyes became hollowed out and empty. Even with my escapades in Japan, a roster of casual fuck buddies was ultimately more exhausting than fulfilling. Hit one and on to the next wasn't doing anything for my soul, and least of all for my dick. Still, the night workers were the most knowledgeable about the city. They met the politicians, businessmen, and entrepreneurs who truly moved and shook. And the best ones worked during the day when you'd least expect it. I grabbed a room at the Aman. Not only did the decor and amenities justify the 200,000 yen per night price point, but if I was going to invite top-ranking night workers to chat, I needed to make them feel at home. After checking in, one of the staff walked me through the lobby where a kimono-clad beauty was plucking away on a koto in front of an almost invisible waterfall. Behind the phantom-like droplets was a bar where good-looking folk enjoyed drinks. Turned out, the ones that could day drink did. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Kwame," the staff member said, pressing the elevator button and bowing so low once I stepped on that I couldn't see their face. The elevator whipped up to my floor as soon as the doors closed. I stepped out to a massive fresh bouquet on a stand in the hallway and walked across the shock-absorbent carpet. The door to my room was heavy, but I understood why once I walked in. The curtains were pulled back, and I had a wide-open view of the city. Green from the parks meshed together with the solid human forms we built to house and productize ourselves. There were a few calligraphy paintings on the wall. The doors to the bathroom resembled modern versions of old shoji doors, giving the room a traditional vibe. I walked up to the wide and tall windows showcasing the city and saw chocolates and champagne sitting on the mini table with a solid card holding welcoming words specifically for me. I removed everything from my pockets onto the counter behind the bed and plopped myself down on the cloud of a mattress with my phone. Without a second of delay, the bed threatened to throw my ass into the deepest of snoozes. So I sat up against the pillow and started tapping away on the screen, looking for a proper shop to fulfill my needs. After running through different listings with women in bikinis and dresses and nothing, I found a membership club that didn't have any photos. Their starting price was 300,000 yen for 2 hours with one of their ladies, who apparently had to hide their faces because they worked as models, actresses, and other high-paying jobs that couldn't risk the association. Positions next to the seat of power. Just what I needed. if real. I called the number, and after the first ring, a man picked up. "Welcome to SSS. How can I help you?" "Hi, I'd like to invite someone over today, but I didn't see any photos on your website. How does your system work?" "Thank you for looking over our website. Yes, per our policy, we like to meet our customers in person first to discuss their preferences. We want to ensure we provide the best service possible. Where are you currently staying?" "I'm at the Aman." "Perfect. Our office is also located downtown. We're able to meet you in 30 minutes if you are interested in inviting one of our partners out." Kwame. Partners. My shoulders fell at ease. That sounds great. I will wait for your staff member in the lobby. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. He took down my name and confirmed the hotel address, and 30 minutes later, a man with tightly trimmed yet wavy jet-black shoulder-length hair met me with a strong handshake. His suit was bespoke and European. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Kwame. I'm Hirami." "Thanks for coming out so quickly." He smiled with his eyes. "Any customer of the Aman is a customer of ours." We sat down and he pulled out his phone. "So what are you looking for?" Apologies ahead of time for my bluntness, but I prefer thicker women, more hips than chest. "What about both?" Hirami said, with genuinely curious eyes. My eyebrows raised themselves. "Well, if she's natural, yes." Understood, although we do have some partners who underwent plastic surgery. We have many options that fit your criteria. We then spent the next 20 minutes swiping through his second phone with an endless photo gallery of beautiful women in lingerie. They all wore the same face, one of experience. "Two caught my eye," I said. Harami stopped scrolling and looked up. "Threesomes are also possible. It just depends on if the women are open to it." I paused for a moment. I could risk one of them not opening up for fear of blowing up the other's spot. On the other hand, I increased my potential surface area of information by inviting two at once. "I'd like to invite those two for a threesome." He nodded and immediately started texting the two G-cup women I pointed out. Within 5 minutes, they'd both agreed to meet at the Aman together an hour later. I paid Hirami the deposit of 100,000 yen required to see the backlist of partners, as well as the 600,000 yen needed for two partners' time. A heavy sum for 2 hours, but the information could dispel the mystery of the mask and give me peace of mind. I enjoyed the free tea in the lobby and flipped through a no-theater book they had containing all the masks made by the only no-mask maker and actor, Michishige Udaka. He dove into his decades of experience creating the masks and then performing with them on stage. According to his book, the performance informed the mask making and vice versa in a way that couldn't be adequately summarized. He was held in high regard, but word on the street was the other mask makers were jealous of his ability to perform. I could empathize, but also I didn't see Yuki feeling the same way. It sounded like older folk were simply afraid of fading out into irrelevance. After some time I heard, "Mr. Kwame?" I looked up from my book and saw my two partners standing before me in long flowing dresses that hid their shape. They wore giddy smiles and looked to be in their early 20s. "Hi, nice to meet you," I said, standing up and leaving the book next to my empty teacup. After telling me their fake names, I decided I'd refer to them by their hair color. Somehow it felt more authentic. The one with brown hair said, "You're so tall." A slight turn to her friend with black hair produced a crease around her chest, and only then did I see the volume they were working with as they giggled and bounced. Tell me about it. I've been ducking through doorways here for a decade. They giggled some more as I turned around to return the book, only to find it and the teacup gone. He looked to the counter where the staff stood. They promptly met my eyes with a short bow. Let's head upstairs, yes? Usually I preferred my age or older, but Japanese men preferred the innocence of youth. Let's go, they said in unison, and instantly the naivete faded to reveal veteran eyes. Okay. We took the elevator up, and as soon as we stepped into the room, they sat on the bed. I sat in between them, and their hands fell onto my upper thighs. Right to it indeed. What do you like to listen to? I asked, pulling out my phone. Black hair leaned in so that her lips massaged the tip of my left ear. Fado. I looked at her, my widened eyes meeting her lowered eyelids. Sentimental Portuguese music. That's a first. I love Portugal, she said, bringing her hand further up my thigh. Every time I go there, I'm filled with passion. I looked over at brown hair. She was bringing her hand up my forearm to my bicep underneath my sleeve. I've never heard of it, she said, drawing her soft hand across my shoulder and onto my bare right pec. But I'm always open to something new. My eyes met Black Hair's, and we shared a kiss. Her lips were thick for a Japanese woman. I massaged her long tongue with mine, and she let her hands drift inwards to my now throbbing dick. Brown Hair followed her lead and unzipped the gates to release the demon. They both stopped for a moment to take it in with their eyes, smiling at each other and then me. Do you want me to give him a kiss? Brown Hair said, already cupping her hands around him and moving up and down slowly. Only if I can kiss them, I said, my eyes traveling down to their legs. We lay back with me in the middle, catching our breath. We chatted for a bit, sharing some laughs at what just transpired. It was their first time meeting each other. I complimented them on their musical collaboration, and they told me how most of their past clients focused entirely on coming themselves. I glanced at the clock and saw that we had 30 minutes left. I let the fado guide our conversation into the main topic. Have you met any collectors before?
Chapter 15, Yuki. We spent the next few weeks meeting on and off. I would spend a couple of days working solo on masks while Kwame searched the intricacies of the group. Then we'd convene over some tea and he'd relay all that he uncovered while I discussed anything I noticed from the Koamote mask. It hadn't spoken to me recently, and I failed to find anything about the carver my father knew. So our meetings consisted mostly of Kwame talking. It was a refreshing way to spend my time compared to when I was under my father's wing. I could see the reactions to my masks from someone knowledgeable about the craft, but not directly tied to the success and or accuracy of my rendition. He was detached but invested in my art. I felt supported but not overwhelmed by pressure. The more I saw Kwame, the more I welcomed the idea of collaborating. The connection I felt working alongside him, trying to discover the ties of the mask to the group, was startling. Before, I truly was starving myself of building relationships by locking myself away in my studio, head down trying to preserve the masks, when connection was actually what I needed to shape the future. Yuki? I shook my head. Yeah? Did you hear what I said? You went blank for a second there. I looked out the window of my shop. It was pouring rain. What if the group isn't man-made? He furrowed his brow. What? I was talking about intel I got from... I sat up on my zabuton. What if the mask is purely connected to the paranormal energy you talked about the other day, and not flesh? He sat there in silence and looked out the window at the rain pelting the roof of the shop across from us. So this organization that has shaken world-class shokunin to their core is a group of yokai. Who knows what they are, but the more I think about it, the less confidence I have that we got some cabal after us. We've spent weeks and essentially have no leads, I said. I was clueless, but the stress of not knowing pushed me to cling to this story. Or maybe it was seeing the Koamote speak. After that, nothing was too big of a leap. It could be a power source for reviving them, a way to bridge them to this world, Kwame said. I smiled. Sounds like it's not too big of a leap for him either. Right, almost like some type of talisman. But when it spoke to me, it talked about freedom. So maybe it was imprisoned by this group. An independent spirit that drives fear into the underground world makes sense to me. Where is it? I nodded. Right, only one way to know. I stood up to fetch the Hinoki wooden box containing the mask. But when I got to my bedroom, the box cover was viciously cracked and gaping wide and open. I just checked it this morning, and it was fine. I tore off the damaged cover and saw the inside was empty. I ran downstairs to the shop area to tell Kwame, but saw him standing, mouth agape, staring at the wall. By the time I made it next to him, I saw the Koamote in the middle of all the other masks, vibrating and shaking them off the wall to float beside it in midair. Well, what is this? I said to myself. The Koamote broke its stoic expression to twist its mouth up in a crazed smile. This was written. The masks all peeled off the walls and floated next to the Koamote, moving their mouths and eyes just like any human could. Kwame moved in front of me with one arm up as a shield against my chest. What do you want? The Koamote bobbed up and down, its cheeks and eyes slowly returning to their normal subdued position. The only thing we are here for is what was already ours. The masks hummed in unison just like the Yokai chorus on stage did, a low droning syllable that shook the depths of my core. But unlike a typical performance, I didn't feel inspired or energetic. Instead, I was rooted in place, in fear. The Koamote jutted her chin forward, and the masks all flew toward us at a blinding speed. I could feel my heart punching against Kwame's arm when he turned around and hugged me tightly. He whispered in my ear, "Don't move."
Chapter 16. Kwame. The windows blew out, spraying us with shards of glass and metal. The masks hummed the choir sounds of the no stage and hollowed out my insides. The noise stopped, replaced by a solid bass wavelength. I held Yuki tightly, her mouth agape, screaming like her heart was disintegrating right there in her chest. The noise pushed us outside, just behind the masks that flew out to escape. The shatter and collapse of the studio came back to my ears, and Yuki's wailing punctuated the loss. I squatted and rubbed her back as she let it all out. The rain washing the debris from our bodies was not enough to wipe what we had just seen. "It's okay, we're going to be okay," I said, hugging her from behind. I could feel my own heart thumping against her back. My desire to protect her was on full throttle, and the voice humming the threat of getting too attached was small. She kept wailing into her hands for a minute until she turned to accept my gesture with wide arms.
Chapter 17. Yuki. I squatted with my hands to my mouth and my elbows tucked in tightly. I was choking on my own breath. A thief did all of this? The detective blinked slowly with his arms crossed at Kwame's retelling of the event. His eyelids hung low as his pupils scanned. Kwame up and down. But I was too gone to divert his suspicion. My father's legacy sat in front of me, destroyed, glass and wood strewn about. I wouldn't believe it either if someone told me a petty thief did all of this. But we knew no one would even attempt to believe us if we mentioned the masks, no matter how much I wanted to let it all come spilling out. Even when the neighbors came around poking their heads over the crime scene tape, I had to resist the urge to tell them everything. Even the neighborhood grannies would have a hard time believing this one. Their ghost stories sublimating into a solid might rupture their hearts. Yet I couldn't budge from my crouching fetal position. The sight of a place I had dedicated so much effort to, now in complete disarray, shattered something inside me. and done by the very art I had poured my life into, the sole object of my pride and identity destroyed my home. Was this the power the group was after? And why did the mask make a move now? "Hey, I think it's best if we distance ourselves a bit," Kwame said, rubbing my back. "There will probably be more questioning soon, but they're okay with us going to the nearby convenience store to get a drink and decompress." "Yeah, let's do that. It's a bit much to process right now," I said, grabbing his outstretched hand. He felt solid, and it wasn't his muscle mass. My hand moved automatically because he was an anchor for me in this moment. Something I hadn't experienced in years. The release that washed over me once I allowed myself to hold his hand was all-encompassing. I wasn't alone in this.
Chapter 18. Kwame. We walked the winding streets of her old neighborhood in silence. The rain had stopped since the detectives arrived, but Yuki's tears still streamed down her face. It hurt to know I could do nothing to ease her pain. We rounded the corner and the light of the convenience store rang out at us from afar like a beacon of hope. Ghana had taught me to combat any traumatic events with a dose of normalcy immediately after. It was the only way to anchor the spirit. I've seen too many members of my hometown suffer the consequences of letting chaos drown them in its riptide. You must let it carry you for a beat without resisting its force, then swim parallel to normalcy to escape its grip. The chime sounded, a short koto string rhythm, an ode to the traditional harp that I thought only Kyoto was brave enough to do. Yuki gravitated to the warm drinks, and I headed to the back where all the cold drinks were. I needed more volume than the smaller warm drinks provided. We convened in the snack aisle and scanned the chocolates. I pointed at the Ghana label, and our eyes met for a moment. She had stopped crying, but her eyes told me she wasn't ready to laugh. I took her warm mugi tea and placed it next to my 1-liter Aquarius bottle on the checkout counter. The teller was a young Nepalese woman who looked at both of us warily for a bit before asking, "Do you want a bag?" in Japanese. "No thanks, we're going to hang out in the front for a little," I said, tapping the screen to choose cash. The world was going digital, but Japan still loved its bills and hard coins. As did I. Normalcy.
Chapter 19. Yuki. I sipped my mugi tea. We had been sitting on the bench outside the shop in silence for a good half an hour. The night air was a calm backdrop to the vortex ripping around inside me. Kwame looked down at the chair, rubbing the wood. "You know, this is probably the only convenience shop with a bench that I've encountered in my decade plus here, and I've been everywhere." I exhaled slowly. I knew what he was doing, and I didn't have enough energy in me to resist his multiple attempts at splitting my turbulence. Countryside things for countryside people. My voice was hoarse. Suddenly he sat up straight. "Right, match the environment to the best of your ability." His tone didn't waver. I capped off my tea and looked at him. "This spiritual force we're dealing with, it still exists on Earth," he said, folding his arms. I scratched my head. "Which means there must be an equal and opposite force somewhere. Assuming the masks adhere to physics, which, judging by..." He stopped it himself. I rubbed my eyes rougher than normal and exhaled heavily, looking up in the sky. If there is another supernatural force somewhere, I wouldn't even know where to start. I closed my eyes, feeling the heaviness of fatigue washing over me. Kwame stood up and came over to me. I opened my eyes to him, blocking the sky with his bright smile. I could see the bulge in his pants and the curvatures of his pecs and abs. I doubt it was intentional, but my mind dispelled the swirling chaos and my ears got hot anyway. "I always like to think who, not how," he said, oblivious to my reaction. "Hopefully your who will be able to tell us what type of who these masks have become, because I'm starting to question my entire career. These masks used to be my silent guardians. Now they're the very danger they protected me from growing up."
Chapter 20. Kwame. Was the Koomote following some ancient calling? Why were its moves so calculated? Weeks of nothing, and then she dips with the rest of Yuki's collection. I unlocked the door and slid out of my shoes to step out of the genkan and into my slippers. I walked to the bathroom and washed my hands and face. A quick gargle cleared out my throat. The kitchen stood spotless. I refused to leave without wiping and washing everything down first, a habit I had retained from my mother. I grabbed a Majiwapa cup from the cupboard and poured myself some Genmaicha tea. The roasted brown rice flavor never failed to rock my heavy head to sleep. I sat at the bar counter and sipped in silence. Dropping Yuki off at the business hotel was relieving. Her face was wrecked by distress, but somehow she let me in during her moment of despair. Now that she was safe, I could rest easy. But the Koomote wouldn't let me. Ghana had its fair share of paranormal sightings, but nothing that held weight like this. I had seen the no masks speak and move without human intervention. I never doubted their power, but the sight of inanimate objects flooded with consciousness was breaking my brain. I exhaled slowly, took my cup to the couch, and sat back without flicking through Netflix like normal. Nothing I did could tear my thoughts away from replaying the destruction of Yuki's studio. The Koomote mask was, without a doubt, a collector's piece. But surely this paranormal group wasn't after it to broaden their collection simply for vanity's sake. And did the mask flee because it was aware of its pursuers? I scratched my forehead. I scanned the bare landscape of my mind for a motive, only to find a few neurons still sprouting from the cracks to breathe life. Their fruit was two words: spiritual war. I propped my feet on the coffee table, avoiding the washi book laced with colored illustrations of yokai from all over Japan. A spiritual war. On one side, a group of collectors that could communicate with a world beyond our own. They found a way to harness the paranormal energy for their own desires. But they found themselves with their backs against the wall when the other side, the creatures of said paranormal energy, refused to sit still under their foot. Human will versus raw, natural life. The oldest story of humankind, unless the group truly wasn't of this world. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and headed to the shower. The warm water washed down my back, taking the soap with it, but the stains of the mask encounter stayed ingrained in my skin. I let the water pour over my head, closing my eyes and retreating into my mind until I could feel myself leaving the shower, my house, and the world. The Koomote mask floated there in the empty space where I now resided. The mouth moved to words I could not hear. Behind it, a long gray-haired man clad in a brown kimono walked slowly up to it. He put his face into it, the eyeholes giving way to his own. It fit perfectly. For a moment, suddenly, his flesh began to melt around the edges. His fingers pried at the cheeks, tore at the eyeholes, and gripped at the chin. It did not come off. There was no screaming, only silence, and the sound of the faucet cranking to a tight halt as I turned the shower off. I stepped out of the shower and toweled off. Before leaving the bathroom, I looked in the mirror only to see the Koomote staring back at me, its grip on my face melting my being away.
Chapter 21, Yuki. Kwame took me to Shitanoji Temple, the first one built by the Japanese government. The priest there was a quirky 40-year-old man who didn't have any of the typical airs of a priest. For one, he was completely lewd and held nothing back. It was jarring at first, but Kwame seemed used to it. A flying mask? Sounds fake. You on the grass again, Kwame? Kwame smiled at me. You say that every time, knowing I would never risk my permanent residency here for a little puff. More and more, I'm starting to assume you're asking me if I know a dealer. Priest? The priest closed his eyes and put his palms together in a prayer motion, slightly bowing. My, oh my, how have I become so transparent? Then, glancing up from beneath his lashes, he said, I only take imported or Hokkaido-grown bud. Everything else is shit. My face contorted. Listen, we came here to find out what the fuck is happening. There are flying masks and my shop is completely destroyed. I don't have the patience for you two jesting around. He slowly straightened and adjusted his gown, looking at me with that plastic Buddha-like smile all monks and priests wore to invite more members into their congregation. I like your energy, but to find that which can topple the kappa, you'll need a calmer approach. I took a breath, my chest tightening. Kappa? He waved for us to follow him. He led us through the small but impressive shrine. It had a decadency in it that was understated. There wasn't an overabundance of gold that you typically saw in shrines. The dimmed lighting quivered as we passed by kamidana that older folk loved to perch high up in their rooms facing the direction that fortune was supposed to come from. The incense burned, and I started to feel my shoulders ease. My studio was gone, but the sense of facing the problem head-on with competent people reassured me in a way I'd never felt before. The priest stopped at a plain wooden door and turned around to tell us, this shrine pays its dues to kami that most people in Japan know already. But this smaller shrine is reserved for our largest and longest donors. You have a shrine within a shrine? Kwame asked. Yes, my friend. Just like you and your precious clients abroad who love exclusivity, we also have our own secret club, and now I'm letting you in on it. Don't tell me, the Hall of Flowers? I feel so honored, Kwame retorted. I'm looking forward to my northern lights this weekend, the priest said, opening the door. A gush of hinoki wood filled my nostrils. The gold and incense all dissipated, and we were suddenly surrounded by a row of unfinished masks that combined elements of kabuki and no. The elaborate marks of makeup from kabuki and the subtlety of no in one mask. Another unknown along the journey. One would think another room full of masks would disturb my spirit. But it was sharing a look with Kwame that relaxed me. We paced ourselves as we walked through the hall, taking in the grain of the wood and the shape of the faces. So familiar that they felt oddly distant. Every new mask on display was a reminder that I was once again facing the unknown. Residue from the last bout I had with that murky, sustained sensation of dissent still flickered about in my body from my dad's death. Except this time, I had Kwame's presence to balance the utter fear I felt in the face of unknown forces. I know I'd crumble without his stabilizing the energy. The priest stopped at the end of the corridor and turned. Welcome to the Hall of Flowers.
Chapter 22. Kwame. The priest first told me about the Hall of Flowers a few years into our relationship. He was a man of his word. Back then, I was a green businessman learning the ropes of how Japanese people conducted business. Now that he saw I had found my bearings, he showed me the haunted hall he mentioned on the downtown rooftop bar all those years ago. Yuki was still adjusting to his energy, but that was the case with everyone that met him. I immediately gravitated to the sharp contrast between his spiritual leanings and degeneracy. He was someone that you couldn't forget even if you dipped your brain in the deepest pit of Kurume Gasuri indigo ink. These vaults contain stories of Japan's most ancient legends, the origin story, Sarugaku no and Kabuki. All three of these art forms have left seeds for us to develop modern Japan. Yet we choose to dissolve their impact with blonde and red-headed actors who can't dance their way out of a land no matter how many la-la-las they sing to the heavens. Yuki looked at me before cracking a small smile. As with any other shokunin, she was quick to adapt to her surroundings. In the business of traditional crafts, adapting to market demand meant life or death. So these masks belong to no particular one of those art forms. They're essentially the base models. Yes, you are learning, my young friend. We're the same age, my guy. The number that beseeches us all lies in the eye of the beholder. What connection do these base models have to the ko-omote and now this kappa? Yuki sounded frustrated. The priest walked up to one of the wilder-looking masks. It was red and looked like a hairy Bishimi demon mask with more ape-like features. Take this one for example. It was made to represent the Monkey King from Chinese lore, the same god that our well-known Saiyan friend Son Goku is based on the ton. As you would expect, this mask was made by a legend, and legends don't just do things, they make things with an expectation that it will outlast them. The hope is decades. But sometimes you tap into the outer rims of reality with centuries-long impact, like this mask. It was made by Zimi. I looked at Yuki, whose jaw already looked like it could hold an apple in it. The creator of No made that mask? I asked, my face like stone. All of these masks were, the priest said, stretching his arms out to encompass the entire collection. I'm not sure how these masks made their way into your hole, but I'm still lost on how this links to our situation. Let's cut to the main act, shall we? Yuki said. The priest turned to me slowly. I like her. I nodded in agreement with her, and he raised his hands to gesture away the pressure. Look, I tell stories for a living. My apologies if you aren't in the right mood to enjoy the build-up. The masks store energy across the generations. This energy is transferred to the wearer only when they are activated. The kappa is the exact yokai you know from your childhood. Except she doesn't hang around rivers waiting for children to dip their hands in for a snack. She wants the masks to bring her world of yokai demons here. More specifically, she wants everything. And she has the power to see it through.
Chapter 23. Yuki. Everything I had known about the no theater world had been flipped upside down by the priest. He revealed all the falsehoods it was propped up on, and also how yokai dominated its origins. Folk tales that ruled my childhood now stood to dissolve all the realities of my adult life. The masks I created were essentially storehouses for spiritual energy to accrue from the yokai world. Not all masks were able to attract this power, but the impact we got from performers on stage was due to the accumulation of this spiritual energy. According to the priest, it depended on the focus and dedication of the carver. Following that line of logic, no wonder my father's masks jumped off the wall like they'd been waiting years for their freedom. The legacy was getting heavier. I suggested Kwame and I get hotel rooms next to each other until we figured out what was happening. Logically, I told myself it just made sense to close the distance. But emotionally, I felt the prick of loneliness stabbing faintly as a threat to the core of my being. Maybe it was that my studio was gone and I needed to feel some type of foundation under my feet. Or was it the growing trust in Kwame and his ability to make me feel safe? Regardless, I knew that being alone wasn't the move. "Meet for breakfast at 6?" I said in the hallway outside of our rooms. The floor carpet was a dull red that added a soft pulsation to Kwame's dark skin. The no-frills design added an unusual assurance. "Wow, it's been years since I've woken up before the sun, but yes, we should get right to work. Finding the kappa's antithesis will take time, and at least we have one location to work from, right?" I shook my head, looking down as I fished the keycard out of my pocket. "What?" he asked. "I just love your ability to look at the positive. We're facing something most people don't even see in movies, and yet your resolve hasn't budged, especially considering we just met." A moment later, I saw his shoes enter my sight, and I looked up at him from a distance closer than typical Japanese people stand when having a conversation. But the warmth spreading through my chest eased my knee-jerk reaction to the invasion of personal space. Without downplaying your studio, there are far worse things that could be happening to us. Like what if my face got ripped off and started flying around? or if your face detached itself from your body, his speech slowed and voice deepened. Now that would be a time to panic. I could hear my heart ricochet against my chest. Our eyes met. He looked inquisitively back and forth between my eyes and my lips. This was the first time I saw any glint in his eye that suggested he was sexually interested in me, or maybe I had just become too dull to recognize these signs. It had been years of relief masturbation. "But yes, we must rest for tomorrow," he said, splitting the silence like some muscled lumberjack. The rush of the red carpet and the blood in my groin slowed, and I came back to reality. "See you tomorrow." My voice cracked, but I thrust the keycard against the door and ran inside before I could see his reaction to it. After a moment with my back to the door, I turned to look through the keyhole. He was there, standing in the same position, staring down the hall. Then he turned to the door and said, "Good night." "Good night," I replied, still pressing my eyes up to the eye hole like it was the squinting Okina mask of joy. He turned, and I heard his door open and close moments later. I exhaled loudly and threw myself on the bed, not bothering to take anything off or even brush my teeth. Instead of letting the water wash away the day, I let exhaustion have its way with me. I was out in seconds, hoping I wouldn't meet the kappa again behind my eyelids.
Chapter 24. Kwame. She really could get it. I closed the hotel door behind me. The urge was there, but an irking feeling told me it was inappropriate. We were working together. I had to keep it professional, but she made it hard. More than her body, her spirit pulled me in. The shokunin all had this in common: the years of effort poured into shaping their inner self through a physical craft. It was a trait that no amount of flesh could fill. I sat down on the hotel bed and took off my shoes. My body felt heavy. The priest did a number on us. The amount of information alone was heavy enough, but the nature of the information left a weight in my chest, blowing untethered with an increasing intensity. After undressing, I hit the shower and brushed my teeth, every fiber of me wanting to immediately hit the sack. The moment I laid my head against the pillow in the dark, the masks lit up in their hallway, right there against the backdrop of my eyelids. Within minutes I was gone, and there again in the Hall of Flowers. The priest led me through, pointing out all the quirks of each mask and how much effort he had to put into getting his hands on them. Then one of the masks came off its mantle and started floating before us. Eerily similar to the time in Yuki's shop, it hit us with the same line, "This was written." But I felt a different energy enter the hall behind us. It was darker, more striking and sharp. We turned to feel green claws enter our heads. Time warped and we were transported to a swamp, the kappa. They all stood below, looking at us strung up like prey they hadn't captured in years. Taiko drums sounded off in the back of the group, with kappa wearing happy coats and tenugi across their foreheads. They beat the drums slowly, as if to massage their prey into submission just before they cooked them. Streams of steam tickled our bare feet. An open knob pot with vegetables floating in it awaited us. I looked at the priest. She wants everything, and she has the power to see it through. I thrashed to no avail. The nabe pot rushed towards me as I fell. I sat up in my bed and threw off the sheets. My chest blossomed and shrank rapidly as I caught my breath. I got up to head to the bathroom and wash my face. Just then, I saw the small floor light on the wall in front of the door flickering a pale green. I fumbled for the switch and hit it on and off. The light returned to its pale orange color.
Chapter 25, Yuki. I woke up just before 5:20. The studio routine stayed with me despite its absence. I washed my face and looked in the mirror. The studio really was gone. A few tears rolled down my face before drying off. As I dressed, I decided to turn on the TV. I had opted out of TV since first moving out to attend university. It was time-consuming, and most of the programs were boring, but I couldn't let the Kappa invade my thoughts this early in the morning. Immediately, I heard multiple voices talking over each other, all of them screaming despite being in the same vicinity, all of them vying for the spotlight. The ability to not listen, yet claim their position as a commentator was amazing. After dressing, I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through the rest of the channels. 5:40. I stopped when I saw a quiet and calm program with grainy coloring. It looked like a documentary. Once the floating aura of the female voiceover came on, my suspicion was confirmed. Shadowy figures flashed on the screen. The camera slowly panned the group. They all wore heavy-looking brown short-sleeved cloaks over orange gowns. None of them showed their faces under the hood. The voiceover almost shook with suspense. This group was known throughout Tohoku for their regular excavation trips to Hokkaido. They sought to uncover the secrets of the yokai there and how it differed from the mainland. My breath caught in my throat. I turned the volume up. Every one of them had connections to the origins of the yokai from the mainland, but the stories that they uncovered in Hokkaido flipped everything they had known on its head, the most startling of which was the Kappa. My eyes widened and then flooded with darkness. The power had gone out. I jumped, heart hammering wildly, but soon I regained my composure and stood up. As I felt around for the light switch, I heard Kwame's voice ring through the walls. He was shouting. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone told me he was struggling. All I knew was that I had to help him. I hastened my pace and my breath followed. I found the doorknob, but it didn't yield to my actions. I bent my knees and pulled the knob down with the entire force of my body, but it didn't budge. What the hell? As I hurriedly lifted my leg to plant on the adjoining wall, right behind my ears, I heard, "I didn't startle you, did I?"
Chapter 26. Kwame. The room was covered in a pale green. The colors circled the walls, pulsating their textures outward. I could feel the patterns lift off their surfaces and bind me. I struggled to wake, only to see the room clearly with my wallet on the desk. There was no separation in reality. This was it. The doors of perception had opened to swallow me whole. I screamed out for help. Sound refused to vibrate, yet I could hear the waves getting stuffed, sonic, strangling. The lines from the wall lined across my skin, tearing off the covers in a slashing motion. The pain dug shrieks out of me that I thought I couldn't expel. Muffled again, I scanned the room viciously. Turning my head against the constriction of my upper and lower body, I saw her. She stood there as if she had been there since I arrived, waiting. Her eyes were red, her face the white of Maiko in Kyoto. The eyebrows were blood red, and her hands weren't hands at all. They were claws. Green claws with fingernails that could peel the marrow from bird bones and saw mammoth bones in half without any effort. I seemed to be pushing through every part of my body to no avail, to her pleasure, in fact, her desire. Yes, she was smiling. The teeth blacker than my cousin's, black as the void, which is this, yes, this is the void. It had no other feeling but nothingness tinged with a dose of swamp.
Chapter 27, Yuki. You are to make us a new mask immediately. The Kappa stood over me and Kwame. Our hands were tied, and we were on our knees inside Kwame's room. After she took me through the wall with some sort of osmosis, I could barely muster up the strength to look the Kappa in her eyes. But I saw Kwame. His face was bruised, twisted in fear and anger. The Kappa had materialized from a myth to a formidable force, one now demanding that I create for her. The priest had warned me of her need for a fresh mask to survive on Earth indefinitely. Without it, she'd perish from the energetic pressure the original Koamote was emitting. The mask had made my collection its team, so its presence was growing stronger. The only way the Kappa could protect herself from this energy was to wear a mask that was equal to the Koamote in force. but she didn't look anything like the folktales from my childhood. That green swamp monster with a lily pad on its head, gruesome teeth, and a lizard-like body was replaced with the body of a middle-aged geisha with intense red eyes. Everything but her scaly, dinosaur-like claws were human. "The Ko-Omote is already out there. Why don't you summon it?" Kwame shouted, baring his teeth. His typical calm demeanor was shaken, but understandably so, because the Kappa seemed to deem him a threat, judging by the bruises she left on his face. She lowered her gaze. "Will you make me repeat myself?" "Sorry, my brain is having a hard time processing an Edo period baba with lizard hands." The moment her eyes widened, I heard Kwame start choking. I turned to see him vomiting an endless string of seaweed followed by brown swamp water. "Stop, I'll do it. I'll make your mask." She smiled.
Chapter 28. Kwame. I didn't think I could navigate the woodblock print from within, but there I was, embedded in its trees and its flowers and its sky. Beasts paraded among the nature. There was no separation. It was a party, their faces contorted in pain. The silence played rhythms that spoke to my deepest urges to shake my hips. The bounce came out and I joined the parade. I was in line and we marched forward as if there was no other way to go, only forward through the trees and the flowers and the sky. I could feel the wind skip across my cheeks as they too contorted in expressions I never knew possible. Was I changing? No, I was change. Just like these beasts, these shadows of human psychology dancing to the madness of our world. Pure insanity distilled into the finest cocktail of embracing the wildness of change. The evolution of spirit I encountered was pounding away at the inside of my forehead. But I marched on. The beasts now fully sitting, I moved into the middle without restraint. They clapped in unison, not like the tap dance for us foreigner that I tasted when I first landed in Japan. Yes, that's where I was. Japan. Not this naughty circle of beasts staring down into my spirit. Not demons on my back that love me, then hate me, but I was there. I had made nothing something. And now that entity was here to swallow me whole. A full excavation into who I was, the circle enclosed. I was now lying on my back. The sky became a shadow. The beast stared down at me, still circling. I felt a laugh bubbling in me. It burst free and I couldn't stop myself. The laughter erupted from my gut, and my body moved in rhythm. Euphoria clashed with their pained faces, multiple-eyed, scraggly-haired, extraterrestrial. Yet earthly bodies smothered me until I lost sense of my physical space. I was no longer there. It was just a space full of energy, flashes of memories, no subject, just people moving alongside Yokai, hand in claw, skipping to a beat of silence. The Kappa threaded her way through the slideshow. She was in each and every instance. The face, the claws, she had always been there. This whole thing was hers. It had always been. She stood at the center, her teeth separated, and the flood of yokai bodies flew through in one parade that continued for ages. The silence slowly ratcheted up in volume.
Chapter 29, Yuki. The Kappa separated Kwame and me. After seeing his bruises, I hoped he was safe. But a large part of me understood he could take care of himself. The Kappa forced me to create the mask in a secluded temple floating in some type of realm led by other yokai, except they were more fully fleshed out. I didn't understand it at first, but slowly I peeled the layers back while I wasn't crafting the mask. The Kappa planned to use the original Ko-Omote as protection while she opened a portal for the entirety of the yokai world to erupt into our world. The Kappa had adopted a human body so that it could navigate our world during its search for the mask. But the constant stress of holding a human form, while balancing out the energetic pressure from the Ko-Omote was too much for the Kappa to handle while opening a portal. It didn't help that the mask had its own plan. It was possessed by another type of yokai spirit. one that directly opposed the Kappa. The priest mentioned that they were of the same world but different in every aspect. It would take time to know exactly how. Kwame had mentioned that the priest spent his days traveling across the country scavenging ancient scrolls, so I didn't doubt his depth of knowledge on yokai or the Kappa. I plunged my chisel into the top of the block of wood. Despite them providing all the tools and a comfortable environment to work in, I dare say, better than my studio, I couldn't fully understand what was happening inside of me. I suddenly felt like I was finally creating for a purpose, albeit one that I didn't fully align with, but it energized me. It had been years since I'd felt this drive to pour myself into a mask. The Kappa never went into how exactly the mask was going to be used and as a key to release the yokai world and why this was her goal. But I picked up the pieces from her worker yokai who guarded the temple in the same robes I saw on the TV back in my hotel room. After finishing my daily shift, I walked to the temple and participated in whatever activities the yokai monks did. Their monstrous appearance didn't take away from the regular monk routine you'd expect at any Buddhist temple in Kansai. Meditate, garden, chant, tell stories, just with a beastly atmosphere to it all. Their hair and contorted figures soon grew on me, like the masks I saw when my father took me to my first no-theater play all those years ago. They were never explicit in their stories about the motivation of the Kappa's plan, but stories hold hints the tongue forgets to conceal. Despite never seeing the Kappa, the fear she inspired in the monks was overwhelming. She was their god. We'd all sit down in a circle around the main monk in the center. He'd lead us through a story, and then we'd eventually disperse and go back to our duties. Once there was a young girl. She was curious about the world. Her instincts led her to the river one day. There she found a loose lily pad. She took it back to her mother for their art project. The next day, the mother and her daughter spent the entire day cleaning and crafting this lily pad into a mask. A one-eyed mask. The young girl loved it. She wore it on her next visit to the river. Our Kappa was waiting for her. She asked her, "What a beautiful mask. Where did you get it from?" The young girl, now nervous and scared, replied, "My mother and I made it." The Kappa walked out of the river and kneeled in front of her. "Wrong, you took it from me." The young girl was now panicking. She took off the lily pad mask and thrust it at the Kappa. "I'm sorry, I didn't know it was yours. You can have it back." The Kappa bared her teeth. "Humans think they own the world. You can't create without us." The Kappa then took the little girl's face and sent her back to her mother. The monks then did a chant, and all stood up in unison to leave. The ensuing silence had me sitting there on my meditation mat in the story circle with my breath tight in my chest, despite the baggy robes they'd provided me with. The story was gruesome, but the word create stuck out to me. All of this movement and intensity was being dedicated to forcing me to create a mask for her. Yet the yokai claimed themselves as nature itself. So what was their motivation? To use us to create a new world for them? To get rid of human creativity itself? This dance between creation and destruction was causing me panic. And the only way I knew how to handle this stress was through throwing myself into my craft. I stood up off the meditation mat and headed back to my quarters.
Chapter 30. Kwame. Crisp dew dropped down ivy hanging from thick trees. The pale green light followed me outside into this swamp. I touched my head. I could feel my face now. The visions of the yokai had dissipated. The air was thick and the fog thicker. Shadows of trees lined my surroundings. I stood up and felt my feet sink into the mud. I was barefoot and wearing the yukata I had on when I went to sleep in the hotel. I moved forward through the Kappa's domain without a purpose, but with clarity. I didn't know what I was to do, to escape her world, or how I could find Yuki. But I felt my feet move, so I gave my instincts the respect they deserved. It was time to explore. The trees came into view one by one as I moved through the sludge, their bark textured with scaly patterns. The sky fought to shove rays of light through the thick overbush, but the pale green dominated. I saw a thick patch of ivy that was shaped into a lopsided oval. My gut moved my feet towards it. As I got closer, I could see the leaves were as scaly as the bark, but the green changed colors with my breath against their surface. The dark green began to glow until the leaves melted away. Right there in the hole of my vision was Yuki sitting diligently carving a block of wood as if she were back in her Osaka studio.
Chapter 31, Yuki. The days dragged on. I was making progress on the mask. I could see the face come alive. The pressure from the yokai monks was enough to crush skulls, but it kept me alert. Their monstrous bodies no longer startling, but their overall energy was heavy. Still, I felt a gnawing sense of dread as this day approached when I would finish the mask and lose this state of flow. The monks started to jitter and vibrate with energy as they saw my mask coming to completion. Almost like an energy source, they would flock to my workstation. A floating group of orange cloaks hovering around a mountainous temple swimming in Chochen lantern light, swaying to the sound of my chisel against the wooden face their queen god was to don. It was eerie, but I had a mission now. The Kappa's vision had been made clear to me during my time here. There's something about shaving a wooden block into a human-like face from antiquity. You excavate yourself in the process. All the experiences, the conversations, and the emotions that bundle up and get clogged begin to flow into one unified stream. I saw the Kappa aiming to bring its thirst for nature over the earth, erasing every sense of human creativity. In her natural world, we had no place, yet she still needed the power of this no mask to survive. The wood shavings piled up around me. The monks swirled in silence. The Kappa wanted to eradicate the world of humanity and its inventions, but what did the Koamode mask want? What was their relationship? The only thing we are here for is what was already ours. The mask's words rang out to me. The legion of faces I poured hours into had conglomerated into one paranormal mess. The priest from the Hall of Flowers had told us the original mask was both a portal to the yokai world and protection for the Kappa. But they were wholly separate entities. The mask wanted freedom, the Kappa wanted control. I put down my chisel, the mask was done. I blew off the shavings and smiled at the young woman looking back at me. I felt my dad smiling down at me. His love expanded warmly throughout my chest. The monks broke their silence with a hum that questioned the air. The swirl enclosed me, and they sang in unison once the storytelling monk took it in his hands and raised it above his shoulders for everyone to see. I closed my eyes and let their celebratory hums ring throughout my body. Floating leaves fell, a soft upward lightness that flowers must speak when reaching for their discreet sip of sun.
Chapter 32. Kwame. The shavings dropped all around her. She was fully focused in her element. I couldn't feel my body, like I had put on goggles to another world and relieved myself of any physical sensation. I was truly a fly on a wall, except the wall she breathed. The entire room radiated with an energy that I only felt glimpses of in no theater. Yuki remained unbothered. The room had melted away, and so too her body. She moved her chisel up and down, forward and backwards, the force equal with every move to ensure similar depth. The block of wood gave way for cheeks, the wide curvature of a forehead, eyes without the pupils, and lips that both haunted and welcomed. Yuki's face was flushed with tension. The creases I first saw between her eyebrows that night in the shopping arcade were smoothed out. Complete presence. The shavings piled up, and the face stared back at her as she held it up, blowing off the residue. Weeks encapsulated into what felt like minutes. How long had I been here? I tried to move and felt nothing. She switched her chisels for bones, staring at them for what felt like an hour. She inhaled deeply and began to grind them down into a powder. She added a bit of water from a beaker of swamp water. She is making Gofun seashell powder to coat the face before painting it. This helped preserve the wood for years. or for longer, depending on what those bones were made of. Still, I couldn't understand why the Kappa was putting Yuki through the entire process when the creator of the Ko-Omote was unknown. The energy alone in the Kappa's world was enough to scramble my mind as if I had eaten an entire forest of magic mushrooms. Yuki was a master in her own right, but would a brand new mask be able to harness the entirety of the energetic pressure she wielded? After applying the white liquid across the face, she moved the mask to the side to dry and started on another block. She began with the same focus and force, carving away the corners for a rounded reality that only existed in her mind's eye.
Chapter 33, Yuki. Only the clever survive. My father seemed to come out in the most dire of situations. I sat up quickly on my futon, wallpaper, TV blinds. I was back in the hotel. I looked down. I was still wearing the monk robes, a keepsake to remind me of what could happen if I moved wrong, but it was their mistake. I threw my legs over the side of the bed and reached into my left sleeve, which had the deep pocket common in the kimono. My hand rubbed against the wooden grain of the mask. I slowly pulled it out and stared into the eyes of the real Ko-Omote mask. Maybe they wouldn't notice. I hope they didn't. But any discerning mask collector would see that the number of hair strands in the sideburns of the mask I passed them made her considerably older than the young virgin the Ko-Omote mask represented. The distraught older women often seen on No stages not only had more strands of hair in their sideburns, but the strands were often loose, the stress of her life expressed through her hair. The face of the real Ko-Omote mask stared back out at me. Her eyes were calm, knowing that she was the prize. The cheeks were plump and full of energy. The smile showed a boastful youth, an energy we'd need to battle the Kappa in her mission to erase not only creativity, but the tradition that it left in its wake. Immediately, Kwame popped back into my mind. I jumped off the bed and ran to the door. Before I opened it, I pocketed the mask and looked through the eye-hole, empty hallway. Still, I cracked open the door and peeked my head out to check both ends of the hallway. Empty. I walked out, pulled the top lock outward to prop open the door, and went over to Kwame's door. 3 swift knocks, and he opened just as the last knock ended. His eyes were as bewildered as mine. What the fuck just happened?
Chapter 34, Kwame. We checked out of the hotel and moved to another cafe about 2 hours away in the countryside. I craved reprieve from the overwhelming sensations from the Kappa's world, so the city was a no-go. Yuki agreed in silence, as she too must have been fried. We sat in silence on the train and in the cafe, sitting across from each other, sipping on the drinks we ordered by pointing out the menu like first-time visitors to Japan. We let the chatter and high ceilings of this older cafe ease away the after effects of the interdimensional prison we had just escaped. The waitress was also the owner of the cafe. Her gray hairs fell over her ears as she leaned over tables to remove the dishes from patrons moving on to the next venue. She moved with purpose and clarity. The swamp fell back into my mind's eye, forcing me back into an instinctual mind frame. The waitress, too, moved with the same gut instinct. Yuki noticed it too, her eyes tracking the woman's coordinated movements. So coordinated, she moved like a natural. This distinction between nature and its manipulation stood there clearly for us to examine. Yet, I could not see where humanity slighted the Kappa. She saw our dreams and our use of nature as destruction, but sought out our powers to realize her own dream. Domination existed in nature as a tool for those that fought to survive, the power to say no.
Chapter 35, Yuki. There were yokai and I felt completely whole yet isolated at the same time. Some distant realm fashioned from the Kappa's energy to survive their expulsion from their home, Kwame said, leaning back in the cafe chair and letting out a heavy breath towards the ceiling. My situation was similar, except I was kept busy with the mask. I made sure to give them a decoy, I said, looking over my shoulder. Remnants of the orange-cloaked yokai monks berating me with their constant surveillance. I know, I saw you. I stared at him, his eyes holding a deluge of memories that looked like they'd hurt to dig into. She's weak. She needs us to bring her vision alive. The yokai is nature itself, but they aren't creative. They need us as conduits to establish their position back on Earth. And that's the mask, a bridge between the worlds, between the seen and unseen. Right, but we still haven't sorted out how the original Koamote mask from your studio fits in with the Kappa's plan. The probability that they are warring factions is high. But why battle it out here, and what does the mask want that the Kappa might have? Kwame said, cupping the teacup as if it were his last drink. I picked up my matcha latte. The only way to truly know is to find it and ask it directly. I have a feeling the original mask is still in the Kansai region. Kwame raised his chin and scrunched his eyes. Why? Well, the National Mask Carvers Convention is held here. My father started it at 20 years old with some of his closest colleagues and competitors. He saw the future of no in the healthy competition. There was too much isolation. This gathering allowed everyone to come together and share their best work to push the field forward. Sounds like an amazing venture and highly useful for the decaying field of crafts. Who runs it now? His colleagues passed along with him, but their sons took over in honor of the work. They've been going for a while, so I'm sure they're getting up there in age too. Although I'm not sure what will fizzle out first, their sense of duty or their interest. Well, if there is anywhere the mask would be, it would be there, no? The Koamote left with all the other masks in your studio. She's probably looking for recruits. All to battle the Kappa. Right, only way we'll know what side we're on is to find this mask. Kwame threw back the rest of his tea and smiled broadly. Time waits for no one, human nor yokai.
Chapter 36, Kwame. I paid for our drinks and we walked through the rice fields towards the train station. Silence again ensued as if to insulate us with recovery time before we endured the next onslaught on our senses. But our bodies spoke. Yuki inched closer to me as we walked. The birds and the bugs filled the air with familiarity. A few steps later, her hand brushed against mine. I looked over. Her eyes dropped, but her lips turned upwards. I stretched my fingers out to take hold of her hand, tough yet smooth. We spent the next 15 minutes hand in hand, silently absorbing the earthly sonics we had taken for granted.
Chapter 37, Yuki. The convention center was full. Whether the universe was at work or not, we had made it on the last day when the winners were selected by the judges. All competitors had to have a minimum of 3 years in mask making. The judges needed at least 10 years of experience and several prizes under their belt. The tension was tight in the air. Kwame and I walked around the center, eyeing the tables while suppressing our erratic energy. At least that's how I felt. The Kappa loomed in my mind while the faces of young women, demons, and older men stared out at me from their mantles on the tables. Their eyes pierced through my anxiety. We both agreed that the key was to find the original Koamote and pair it with the real mask I made while under the Kappa's watch. That somehow talking through masks was the only way to reach a sincere point of communication was a mere guess. But an educated one, the first step was in uncovering it. We walked towards the front of the center where the judges were seated. All the men looked stately. Grayed over and faces hanging, their postures suggested years of sitting in the same position. But their eyes punched whoever they met with force. Their entire aura shouted that they were ready to review the masks and go home. But those eyes, they never shined brighter. I scanned the other side of the room. Nothing so far. How about you? Kwame said, close to my left ear. What do you think of the judges? I said, twisting my neck to look back at him. He let his eyes gravitate towards the front, and his brow frowned. The one in the center stands out for some reason, something about his eyes, right? Kwame looked at me, puzzled. Yeah, it's just a feeling. but the other artisans look hungry to dive into the competition and see what works of art the next generation has poured their energy into, while the center judge just looks, well, hungry. He might be our guy. A bell rang. The competitors all stood at attention in front of their tables. The judges stood up and faced the entirety of the convention center. They were speaking, but I felt their words drown out in the presence of the center judge's eyes. He was desperately hungry, almost pleading with every breath, yet so subtle. The other judges remained completely oblivious to him. Kwame and I stood towards the back while the judges roamed the room slowly in a line. They each took the carver's masks into their hands and rotated them while inspecting each small detail: the nose, the brow, the mouth, the curvature of the cheeks, the hair strands, the paint, the amount of wear that was applied to give it an ancient feel, the ears, the holes that housed the strings that held the mask on the actor's face, the level of these holes. It was all to be examined and measured against the masters of old. Yet my father always wanted to leave room for innovation. It seemed these judges preferred to focus on preservation, or maybe they were just going through the motions, all except one, the center judge. He was almost drooling over each mask as he took it in his hands, his eyes devouring it along with his hands. The way he touched the masks elicited reverence, but I couldn't get over his eyes. They looked otherworldly, almost as if he wasn't here, his body a mere vessel for some power elsewhere. The judges finished their round and headed back to the stage to tally the votes. They deliberated for a few minutes, exchanging notes while the contestants stood at attention in front of their desks. A taiko drum rang out in the background, drowning out their whispers. A ball of privacy in front of everyone was a feat in itself. The way they were able to decipher the intricacies of each mask in record time, a masterclass in decision-making. Kwame nudged me with a smirk. I know, we're on a mission. It was easy for me to get caught up in the heat of the moment, the fact that there was still a group of dedicated individuals pouring their bodies, time, and energy into preserving this art form would have brought me to tears months ago. But after meeting Kwame and experiencing the power of interdependency in real time, I only felt grateful. They're about to announce the winners, Kwame said with a spark in his eye. He was just like me. He wanted to discover the depths of the no-mask experience. It was more than one could anticipate. You had to actually throw yourself fully into it to know it. The center judge took the microphone and touched on it a few times with his fingers, long like wisteria branches. The contestants this year created lovely art, so lovely I feel nostalgic for my years as an apprentice. The room shook with quiet anticipation. My eyes met the center judge's. He looked down through his nose, and for a split second I thought I saw terror. I looked at Kwame. He saw it too. Maybe he too felt this looming confrontation, a clash with the Kappa, a being that defied the very laws of nature and craft. But those days are no longer relevant. What we have here is the future of no theater standing before us. Everyone should feel happy about what they've created, for it is in the creative process itself that the true treasure lies. Now we shall share that treasure with the world, starting with Kansai. The convention center erupted in applause. We clapped along, all the while wondering why, when soon our thoughts were met with not an answer, but more confusion. The claps began to ride rhythmically in unison. The judges stood there with their shoulders hunched and heads hanging low, their hands mechanically clapping with no human hesitation. Kwame and I stopped. We scanned the room. The contestants all held the same hunched-over posture as the judges. They were gone from the room, disappeared from their heads, but their bodies were present. "A calling?" Kwame said. My uncles used to reenact these rituals back at home, a sort of spiritual seance where the participants allowed their bodies to be taken for the promise of an awakening. "Enlightenment?" I asked, swiveling my head around to monitor the rise in volume bursting from the friction of the spiritually taken's hands. Kwame grimaced as the clapping increased in intensity. "Something like that, but this appears to be the opposite, not a release out of this world, but rather bringing something in." I could feel the heat from their applause vibrating the air. The force reverberated through my skeleton. Not even the heavenly bell from the Dojoji no play could match this energy. Just as I thought the blurring hands would rupture my eardrums from afar, the contestants and judges suddenly stopped clapping. A vacuum so wide open that I fell to my knees. Kwame quickly stooped to help me up, and as we stood up, the judges came into my eyeline again, except they now wore masks. All female masks, while the center judge wore the ko-omote, the original.
Chapter 38, Kwame. We had brought her out, the ko-omote, the essence of no theater standing before us. I felt all the years I had dedicated to understanding shokunin and their crafts flood my nerves. Their countless hours of effort and pain funneled into forged skill, physical manifestations of their spirit. No masks held these spirits for real, and now we were to face its leader head-on. Or were we to accompany it on its mission?
Chapter 39, Yuki. You found me again. That deserves celebration, the center judge boomed. Except now his mask and demeanor were completely transformed. The mask was his personality now. His voice, although deep, had a femininity to it. Kwame, this time, let's not provoke it, I said under my breath. My thoughts exactly. We're simply here to discover what it is to the kappa. The judge jumped off the stage with a youthful stride and walked straight to us with no hesitation. His posture was straight as a chisel and his chin was up. The mask moved as if it were his face. The eyes and mouth contorted and twisted with each little emotion. The ko-omote stopped directly in front of us, an arm's length away from our faces. You have relinquished your fear. No, rather, you have been thrusted into our world and have taken it as it is. I understand. Time has spared me no pain in adapting to your world. I took a deep breath. You left my studio with my masks. Are they with you? The mask tilted its head. To your dismay, they were too powerful for the humans they possessed. The energy overwhelmed their spirits, and they burst. I came here to find a lesser quality. It appears my judgment has been confirmed. Your Japanese sounds classical. What era are you from? Kwame asked. The ko-omote's eyes disappeared into its cheeks with a grin so wide I thought it might morph into the Okina mask of peak joy. I am Zimi's child. Kwame and I staggered. My chest tightened. Then why is your shokunin stamped from the Edo period? In this moment, I sensed doubt. Do you not believe a child of Zimi's is worth preserving? Kwame stepped forward. That's not what she's saying, but we understand now. You were created and worn by the creator of no theater himself. Zimi the ko-omote scanned Kwame and me for a while in silence. The other judges and contestants stood still with their masks, but their shoulders and chests moved up and down with each otherworldly breath. As you two may know, there is another force here not of your world. I must eradicate it to preserve Zimi's legacy. We are flowers of his creativity. The kappa and her affinity for nature are a direct threat to our existence. Raw, unfiltered power. We have met the kappa. She took us to what seemed like her own pocket OF reality and forced me to create for her the same mask you have. Your face. The mask stepped towards us with its brows turned upwards. Where is she? We don't know, but she is desperate, Kwame said. I have no questions as to why. She needs our energy to establish her presence here. Her nature cannot simply supersede the nature on Earth. She needs a container to house her natural energy, a mask created by a true master. We need to find her and banish her from this realm if you value your lives. What happens if she gets this container? I asked. The surrounding masks started to vibrate, subtly at first, then increasing in intensity like close lovers. Will she be able to fully erase the crafted embodiment of the human spirit? The ko-omote relaxed its brow. She will come to dominate this realm. Everything you have manifested through creativity will melt in her swamp. You will become ornaments like moss on a tree. Your mind will fade away until you lose the ability to think and simply become a piece of nature that acts. But no need to imagine, for she has already found us. The ceiling windows shattered, and the glass rang down throughout the convention center like hail on fire. Kwame reached over me to shield me from the shards. His eyes squinted in pain as the pieces fell around him, in him. The Kappa hovered through the window with a ray of sunlight guiding her descent. The place of dreams, the place to be.
Chapter 40. Kwame. Her light was shimmering, and it was only then that I understood. The essence of nature in streams, flooding spaces with direction, the sunlight streaming through the trees. Komorebi, nature making itself known in every moment we were allowed to experience in its world.
Chapter 41. Yuki. The Kappa landed in front of us with no sound of impact, no longer a shadow in folklore, but a tangible terror in our world. The Koamoti mask wasted no time in attacking. It yelled for the other masks to launch themselves at the Kappa. The Kappa bent down with a look of pleasure on her face. Her arms were outstretched, with her fingers ready to grip and tear. One by one, she launched each of the masks into the air with what looked like judo. But they didn't fall. They stayed suspended. Soon she had all of them floating, except for the Koamote. She stared at the three of us while raising one moss-covered arm above her head and twisting her open palm into a fist. Her face creased in euphoria as the masked judges and contestants contorted in pain until their masks popped and cracked. Then silence as the pieces of the masks fell around her. Before the Kappa could lower her arm, the Koamote appeared in front of her like a shadow on the wind. Bent low, he threw punches with the full force of his hips and landed them in her gut. She buckled and dropped her hand. The masked bodies fell around the convention center. Blood flowed violently through the lifeless bodies as their organs settled from being twisted unnaturally. The sounds of gagging from the dead splintered across the space, bouncing off the metal walls. Another explosion. The Koamote and the Kappa were moving so fast, Kwame and I could only flick our heads around to the aftermath of the blast areas. Rooted in place, my father's dead body flashed in my mind. I had buried his face, eyes widened, deep into the recesses of my mind. It was as if he died from shock while sitting at his studio desk, and I couldn't process it. It was too much for a young daughter who now had to fill shoes so big that an entire industry could walk in his footprints. But why now, Dad? Why come to me now? The ground in front of us caved in and the two yokai appeared, viciously locked hand in hand, shaking with a force that looked as if it could even break Kwame in half. You have no power here. It is time for you to return, the Koamote said, straining. Says the parasite, feeding off humans for life. There is no going back. We are here to stay. But you don't have much time left, the Kappa said, breaking their grip. She jumped and slid back from the force. The Koamote flew back against our palms, but even with Kwame there, he pushed us back a few meters. I looked down at the Koamote, who was breathing heavily. What exactly happens if she gets your mask? The Koamote stood up and took off the judge's suit jacket. There is no reality where she gets my mask and you survive. It is the force that destroys all others. It spells the complete and utter natural reclamation of your world. Kwame stepped in front of the Koamote. Then we cannot risk your safety. Yuki, pass me the mask you made in the Kappa's dungeon. My chest tightened. Right, if we protect the original, we can buy time. Not sure if my mask will do anything for you, but it's our only option. I passed Kwame my mask, and he slipped it on with haste. The Kappa watched from afar with more curiosity than anything. The Koamote looked at me. Thank you, I will retreat. Somewhere I know she will not find me for the time being. You will only see me again if you survive. The Koamote removed a golden sensu fan from his pocket and flashed it open with a swift shake. The pine tree design over its broad surface flashed for a second before he raised it to his face and then held it out, pointing towards the Kappa with a straight arm. The Kappa shrieked. Glass broke. Kwame and I immediately knelt down, holding our ears, and the Kappa charged. The Koamote looked down at me for one last moment and nodded before he pulled his arm in and closed the sensu fan with his other hand. He was gone a moment before the kappa swiped her claws where his face once was. Kwame wasted no time. He swiped his leg from his bent position to trip her. She jumped and threw a geta-clad foot towards Kwame's head. He ducked. I stood and ran backward to the stage with my eyes still on them. They slammed into each other with their fists, but neither dropped. Soon their movements were too fast for me to track. I turned and climbed over the bodies the kappa dismantled, boosting myself on stage. From this angle, I could see that the kappa was more combat-ready, but Kwame held his own. He grappled with her, and although he eventually got overpowered, he never ended up on the floor without her in his grip. I scanned the stage and the room for anything I could use to edge the advantage in Kwame's favor. Microphone stand, curtains, sign desk, mask stands. Nothing useful, until I looked to the side of the stage where the lighting staff would stay during plays. One small taiko drum and sticks attached to its side. I ran to it and stripped the sticks of their holder. As I wound up to hit the face with all my strength, I saw that it was the same drum used in no plays, to heighten the presence of the actors on stage and glue the story together. And now I would use it to remove the one block from its connectivity. I hit the drum and the sound resonated through my body, illuminating from the center to my extremities. I raised my hand for a second hit when my wrist was enveloped with what the force of the bell, dropping in the dojoji play, must have felt like on the main actor's neck in the infamous accident live on stage. "You're done," the kappa snarled. Her grip shifted and suddenly the drumstick was not pointing upwards but towards my head. But I couldn't process how because my arm was still pointing straight up. When I turned my head to look, I could see that my wrist was broken clean off my arm with the bone sticking out of the skin. The vision funneled the pain directly to my brain, and I screamed until the kappa's face went swampy. I fell on my back, dropping the drumstick and gripping my dangling wrist with my other hand, which was seemingly still attached. But my body cleared away every other sensation like a no-actor's stomp on stage with pain so clear and sharp I could have been sitting on the tip of a yanagiba knife and felt more comfortable. I shifted my hand down the forearm and let the wrist hang loose. The kappa stood over me, approaching with purpose. It's a shame that the brightest of you has to suffer for us to thrive. Still, now you can taste our pain, a dull light that persistently flashes until it blinds you. Her eyes stretched, pushing her red eyebrows to the end of her forehead while bringing her hand back and shaping her hand into a spear. Her hand came down faster than I could move. Blood slapped me in the face.
Chapter 42. Kwame. Yuki was down. I redirected the power of the mask coursing through my tendons into my legs to jump to the stage from across the convention center. The kappa stood over her body and without turning around let her leg pummel my testicles inwards. Somehow the mask dissolved any pain and I grabbed her leg to swing her around, feeling the mass of her weight tear at the ligaments in my shoulder as I threw her off the stage. I made my way to Yuki and felt claws dig into my shoulders. I turned and pointed edges toward the mask off piece by piece. I was getting carved out until she curled her fingers back and let her knuckles sink into my flesh. I refused to let her at Yuki while she was unconscious. There was no bone in my body that would yield. I took the barrage and let the blood misdirect her force, pushing her off balance. I fumbled for the taiko sticks lying on the ground and shoved one through the kappa's red eyebrow, forcing a shriek from her that ruptured through the center and melted the walls. I covered my ears and covered Yuki with my body. I could hear nothing but the pulse of her breath.
Chapter 43. Yuki. I awoke to Kwame's face over me. His mouth moved in one blurry motion. "Yuki, Yuki." As my vision cleared, a searing pain grew bright in my mind. I looked down at the source. My right hand was gone. The arm stopped at the wrist. Blood rolled down my arm slowly and covered Kwame's fingers. He was gripping my arm hard as if to stop the bleeding, but the last thing I saw before passing out again was that he should worry about his face more than my arm. Half of his face was so red and bruised that he looked like the Bashimi mask. The next time my eyes opened, I was with Kwame again. This time, he was sitting next to me. The curtains and taiko from the stage were gone. In fact, the sky was a murky brown, and I felt soggy wetness underneath me. I welled up the strength to let out a soft Kwame. He swiveled around instantly with eyes almost as wide as the Hanya mask. "Yuki, you're awake?" He cupped my head in one of his bare paws and sat me up slowly. "What is this?" I coughed. He shook his head. "I thought you were in the Kappa's realm, or at least that's what the Koamote said. He came back after the Kappa attacked you on stage. I couldn't make it in time. She had already torn my mask, your mask, off me. I had nothing left. If he hadn't been there, she might have taken more than your hand." I struggled to remember the Kappa was over me. She had thrown her hand at me in a spear-like motion. Then I was out. I shook my head to clear the fogginess. How did she take us here? "I don't know for sure. She and the Koamote were battling it out for a minute. And then suddenly her face changed. She screamed something, and she plunged both of her claws into the ground. Swamp water burst from the ground and covered the entirety of the community center like a tsunami. Before the waves took us, the Koamote shielded us. Now we're here." I scanned the Kappa's swamp. This was the community center. There was no semblance of a building. The entire area was an open-air, dark swamp. Trees hung in the background, cracked over like 90-year-old obachans haunting the neighborhood. The ground was covered in a moldy moss, and a thin line of what I could only assume was swamp water. A botanical yet spoilt smell filled the air. A blanket of thick, light green fog sifted through the air like some ancient ghost seeking a host. Kwame looked at me. It has to be something where she controls the environment fully. Otherwise, why would she bring us here? Let's try to find the Koamote. He ran off, saying we should stay still if we wanted to stay alive. But either way, we're dead. Might as well see if we can aid him in toppling this lizard queen. He grabbed a web of moss and somehow fitted it into a bandage that stopped the bleeding. I saw the moss attach itself to the wound and invade it, but the pain subsided, so I let it. We walked over knotty roots and the small beasts that occupied their shadows. A mixture of insects and rodents that we could only assume were yokai. Frightening still, but we both had seen too much to overreact to small vermin. Soon we saw the Koamote, clothes torn, tied up against the wide face of a toppled tree trunk. With the tree rings emanating from behind his core, the soiled vines pulling his limbs to their limit, and his head hung low with the mask's eyes closed, he looked like a torture victim. I disentangled from Kwame and ran towards the Koamote, but before I got far, Kwame jumped from behind me and put one tree-like arm across my chest and another hand over my mouth. He moved us behind the nearest trunk. Soon after, the Kappa appeared. But she no longer bore her white geisha face. Instead, she had fully embraced the face of the yokai of legend. The river devil that had feasted on villagers stood there in the flesh. Her darkness threatened any hope I had left. She floated towards the Koamote and pointed one finger towards him. His face lifted and the mask started to pull off. His skin resisted, but with one clear flip of the hand and a curl of her finger, it tore off cleanly. The mask flew onto the Kappa and she immediately grounded herself. The swamp water formed a vortex around her that rose and collapsed in an instant. When it had dropped, her body had transformed into a naked black, floating musculature that resembled a genie without the bottle. She faded into the swamp mist in one moment, and in the next we felt her breath on our necks. "Welcome home,"